So hello, this is another live stream, part of the daily series of live streams. I thought I'd just come on, see who's about, see if we get some people watching, answer a few questions, talk about medieval life, talk about life in general. You can get to see a modern guy from the modern world talking about the Vikings and the Norse warriors and Saxons, or we can just read your comments and talk about, daily, everyday things. And we'll wait for some people to come along. I'm a little bit late today, but I'm just leaving it a little bit late today for the American audience, because I know we've got quite a few American fans on the channel, and it's always nice to include them and not just think about live streaming in the UK, because we're international on this channel. I'm having a shandy because I'm thirsty. Oh look, I found my pen. I've been looking for that. Why is it so blooming difficult when you're trying to set up your live stream to go from vertical to horizontal? But it took me 4 or 5 attempts just to get this live stream in the right horizontal orientation. YouTube could definitely make that a lot easier, I think. And so hello, do leave a comment and do like the live stream. If you don't know who we are, I'm bragging. I'm a Norse modern day warrior. This that's always a big question I always get quite a few times in life. Can you actually be a modern Viking? Can you be a modern Norse warrior? Is there such a thing? And of course, we don't exactly live 1,000 years ago or 1,200 years ago where we're getting on long ships and going to raid wonderful places and nick all the gold and silver, which in my mind is a damn shame, because I think there'd be more adventure if we was allowed to, go and raid and pillage. But of course, we don't live in those times. And many years ago, when I was thinking about the old aspect of being a modern Norse person, trying to follow those Norse and Viking beliefs, I kind of concluded that, well, if I can't raid Francia and I can't go and raid Ireland, I'm just going to raid YouTube. So this is one of the fundamental reasons why this channel came about. So do we have any comments so far? Let's just make sure we've got the live chat enabled. There we go. Do give it a like. I'm having a beer. This is the only drug I partake in, is beer. I'm having a shandy, to be honest. It's got lemonade and half beer. And I'm actually drinking a Banksy's bitter. Apparently Banksy's bitter are no longer in existence. So it could be the end of the buying cheap bottles of Banksy's bitter, because they're only about 85p a bottle. And I don't think for a bottle of beer for 85p or 99p, whatever they are, is too bad. I wonder what percentage it is. 3.4%. It's not the strongest of beers, but then again, I don't really like a strong beer, because you get some of these 5 or 6%ers, and you have 3 or 4 of them if you go out with your friends, and you can really have a bad headache the next day because it's just too rich in alcohol. So yes, so I got no real set idea what I'm going to talk about on camera. We're just going to go with the flow and see how it goes, and just do a live stream, because it's all about building momentum on the channel. I'm trying to just do a live stream every day for you, and the odd day I may miss it if I get too busy or distracted or I'm out. These things happen in life. I mean, it's not all about YouTube. I've got my own social life, and I had some really good news the other day, because my local pub called the Abbey Inn, and it's 900 years old. You just imagine that. You go to a place to go and have a beer and it's 900 years old. But they tell the truth, they haven't been serving beer there for 900 years. No, it used to be part of a medieval monastery that goes back to the 12th century, the 13th century. So, but you think about it, I mean, that's pretty incredible. So it got closed down a few weeks ago because it's a Samuel Smith brewery, and they have this really strange, policy where you're not allowed to take your mobile phone, and you're not allowed to have a mobile phone in the pub. And then somebody who's a YouTuber goes around doing reviews of pubs, took some sneaky photographs about 4 weeks ago, and then Samuel Smith closed the brewery down. But I was out on Saturday and I had some very exclusive news. It's now in the mainstream media, so I can talk about it on camera. So my neighbours who live down there a little bit of a way, a good 5 minutes walk, because I've got a large garden, they took me out Saturday. So, do you want to go out for a beer? Yes, I'm always up for a beer. There's a little bit of a story. So I said, right, I did a live stream. I'll pop round at 8:30. Well, I did. I did a live stream on Saturday night. It was 90 minutes. And then straight afterwards, I was already ready to go. I had my jeans on and I had my wallet in my pocket ready to go. So I just had to lock the house and go over to my neighbours. And we drove up to a pub called the Hollybush, which is in a place called Makeney. And I've got another story about that with my life, actually. I'll tell you in a minute. So I went up there, and it's a really nice pub. It's very eccentric because you've got all these tools hanging down from the rafters, and all the wallpaper and all the paint is all chipping and falling off the walls. And they do some lovely beer. I mean, the beer is to die for in there. They have a Hartington IPA. They did we had a Timothy Taylor, a landlord. That was not too bad, but slightly tangy. So perhaps it's getting towards the end of the barrel life. And then we had 2 pints of a beer called Rat Pack. And I must say, that was, quite nice. Not made by rats, of course, or has no rats in the beer, thank God. So then I was sitting in the pub with my neighbours. And they're like little old hippies, from back in the day, in the early 70s, I would imagine. And, was there, talking away. And in walked 2 other people I know, called Martin and Marie. And I thought, oh, bloody hell. Well, I was quite surprised. And they came down to tell us some news. Mick and Maureen knew, I think, a couple of nights beforehand. So there I am, and Martin sat down and said, oh, I've got some news to tell you, Andy. Oh, yeah, what's this then? And they said, well, we've taken over the landlordship of the Abbey. And, Martin's a really nice guy, and Marie works in the pub, and she's really nice. Of course, if you're not from around here, you're not going to know what I'm talking about. So that was a nice surprise, and I'm looking forward to going back. And of course, I can never live stream in that pub because you're not allowed to take your mobile phone. But I must say, it's quite a change, but especially as a content creator, because I'm always working on my phone. I could do with another phone, so I can have 2 phones working at the same time just to work on videos. And I'm always trying to increase the quality of the videos and not make lazy content. Although some days when you're in a rush, you think to yourself, well, I got this video, it's not quite perfect, but let's just put it out and we'll see the reaction. I could always unlist it or delete it. Never delete videos. Yeah, and in this pub they do wonderful homemade pork pies. And the amount of people I see in there, having a big pork pie between 2 or 3 of them, every time, they must sell loads of them. You don't know what a pork pie is. It's like a pastry, and it's got like pork in it and bits of pork jelly, and it's really nice. I like it with a bit of mustard myself. I don't like a pork pie without something to add to the taste. So, and it's round, you slice it like a cake, and then you eat it. Bit of mustard, oh, that's lovely. And of course, a pint of beer. And if you got, a bit of cheese to go with it, even better. And then many years ago, in my childhood, I know Makeney. And Makeney, it's about 3 miles up this way. Perhaps we could do a location filming of it, and I could show you that pub, the Hollybush. And the Hollybush is actually one of the top 25 bars in the whole of Europe. It keeps winning that title every year, and it's in the top 25. So just think, on my doorstep, a bus ride away, and I could probably walk it in 20, 30 minutes on a good day. There's a top 25 pub in Europe, and it really is a nice place. And of course, being English and being British, not only do we love our tea, and probably our coffee as well, but we're well known for liking tea in the UK, we also love our beer. Because it's such an old thing as brewing. It goes way back in time when you think about it. Because if you lived in a village and, you got a surplus of wheat or barley or various ingredients you can put into a mash to make a beer and alcohol, it's going to purify your water. And of course, in the old days, in the medieval days, you had 3 forms of beer. You had like what I'm drinking would be classed as a wheat beer because it's very weak and not much alcohol. And I must say, I do love a shandy. Then you get your medium beer, which is a bit stronger, more of your 4 or 5 percenters, And then you get your top of the table beer for those special occasions, and that'll be, 6 to 8, even 9 or 10% back in those days. And you do get very strong beers like that today. And of course, your top of the table beer, your top range of ale you made, because when you're brewing, you always ended up with 3 different sorts of ale, and you'd give your children the wheat beer and the elderly Because if the water's not pure, you got to give them something to drink. And let's face it, we need water as human beings because that's what we're mostly made out of. I mean, it's always, pretty bad when you get dehydrated and how bad the headache gets. So we've been brewing for an awful long time in the world, and all over the world. And we often think about that. But another thing that, of course, they would have had is the whey of cheese. So the whey of cheese is the residue, or the watery residue from cheese making and making butter. And they would have given that to the elderly, and they would have given that to your children as well. But if you've got a water source and it's contaminated, and you got to boil it, and if you don't boil it, you're going to end up being very, very ill. And of course, in those times, there's no such thing as a National Health Service. There's no such thing as a doctor. Although, there'd be a wise woman, or there'd be the blacksmith, and they would have a lot of knowledge because it's all passed down. So they'd know a lot about herb law and looking, and using the plants in the hedgerows. I mean, what we called weeds, they called medicine. So they also have that knowledge. But of course, you can just get a small cut on your finger in the medieval times, and that gets infected, and before you know it, you're in a very bad situation, and you could fundamentally die from just a very tiny cut. So it's not like today when you get an infected finger and you have to go to your doctor and get some antibiotics if they're generous enough to give you some, and you're lucky enough to get an appointment, because it's so fundamentally hard to get an appointment these days. You're more likely to get one over the phone than you are in person. So we often take medicine and those sort of things for granted. So please do say hello in the comments. And if you've got any questions you want to ask me, you can ask me fundamentally anything, in reason, and I'll try to answer those questions. And I do know a little bit about everything because over my years of being around on planet Earth, I've read, hundreds, if not thousands of books. And I certainly picked up a lot of books and read them as reference. If I want to look up something, I go, all right, look at the index. All right, I'll have a look at that, read that. All right, I learned something. That's great. And it's quite amazing with technology these days because I use Gemini with the voice activation thing. And if I'm cooking something, I'll ask you. And the other day, she was talking about apples to me. And we're talking about apricots. Apparently, apricots are about 4,000 years old and were produced in the hills in China. And then gradually they came over from the east, and then the Romans had them, and the Romans would like to roast them with honey. And I must say that sounds quite nice. But I do love a bowl of apricots now and again. And of course, we often take these things for granted because we can go down the supermarket today. I could literally leave here in 10 minutes. I can go to the supermarket, buy what I want. Steak, lamb. And if I go a bit later on, I can go and get it out of the bin for free. There's another entire story because it's amazing what we throw away. And at the moment, I've got some nice cakes and I've got some nice bread, and they've just been thrown away by the co-op. And I have a friend of mine who goes every night, and she raises the co-op bins in the area. And, she gets veg and she'll get steak, as long as you're quick, because what you don't want is leave that steak out. So generally, with a lot of shops, they just throw things away just before they close at 10 o'clock. So you go, half 10, and you'd be amazed what you can find. I mean, I've got a load of milk at the moment, and so my milk hasn't cost me anything because it came out of a bin next to the co-op. And so all today I've been drinking coffee and tea, and I've had quite a bit of coffee and quite a few cups of tea, and the milk's been free. So how wonderful is that? But then again, I know a lot about dumpster diving, and I got into that a few months back. Well, I've always been a bit of a dumpster diver and a skip diver. If I see a skip and I think there's something in it that's nice, I'd normally knock on the door. You should always do that if you're going into skip diving, and you should always ask permission, generally so, because then if you ask permission, then you're not going to be arrested for theft. And I don't think anybody really has ever been taken to court for taking stuff out of a skip without asking. But you just don't want that confrontation with somebody. So always knock. There's a bit of wood in there, or, there may be, a few antiques. I've had antiques out of skips, and I've had gold and medals and you name it, knives and axes. So always knock. Sometimes if you can't get an answer, just leave a note and put it through the door. So I had a few things out your skip. If you've got a problem, just send me a text and I'll put it back. But generally, most people are thankful that you're taking stuff out of the skip because they can get more stuff in the skip. And so you're doing them a favour, but always try to get, permission. But perhaps, if we ever buy a body camera, perhaps I'll do some filming and do one of these dumpster diving videos, and we'll go and show you some of the amazing things mean, I've had bottles of vodka. I mean, I've had crates and literally boxes of vodka, and I don't like vodka. I'd say I gave it away and sell it on. But you know, if you find something for free, you know somebody will have it for nothing, give it away. Anyway, so lovely. Thank you for the 2 likes. Thank you for the 8 people watching. It's quite nice at the moment. We've got that trending video going viral. I think it's on 600,000 views, which is pretty amazing and mind-blowing from my point of view. Even though it's, you know, I would have loved it to be a more historical video and something a little bit more serious than a comic-y, jokey video about, you know, what it's about. If you don't know, go and, after this live stream, go and check it out. But I did make and film the other day a more serious video covering that subject because, as I say before on live stream, it's quite important that we are responsible as human beings and we take responsibility for our actions, and therefore that's why I made a very long 45-minute long video talking about that subject. I don't want to mention it on the live stream too much. You can mention it in the comments, of course. Yes, 11 people, that's fantastic. And it's nice to see also the live streams doing a bit more popular as well, getting more people watching, because basically, you know, we're trying to build that momentum. I couldn't think about that word the other day. So we've got a comment here from Sam Stapleton. I made it. Yeah, you made it, Sam. That's why I waited a bit longer today before I did a live stream so that you can join, my brother. And of course, you're all my friend, and I love you guys to bits because, you know, you really do make the channel, and I always appreciate and love your comments. And I've been on a massive comment answering marathon today, and I still got loads and loads to do. And I've edited tomorrow's video, which is part 2 of the video where I'm sitting down and crafting a wooden club. And I know I think we've got 6 episodes so far, and I've still not finished it. And so I reckon another 3 or 4 episodes, and then I can start thinking about making something else. But then I did do a live stream the other night when I was outside testing a knife against some bottles, which was quite interesting. And I did a little bit of crafting of debarking some wood for the next job. So I know the next series, well, whether you call it a series or not, but the next crafting series is going to be me making 2 or 3 Anglo-Saxon or Viking style mallets. And I may have to cheat slightly and drill the hole with a drill, but I'm going to do that beforehand. I don't know whether to actually drill the hole first and then work on the wood, or should I work on the wood and drill the hole afterwards? I've not decided on that yet. Perhaps I may try both methods so we can cut it as an experimental archaeological video, and it'll be a series, of course. Maybe not as long as the crafting of the club. And then we can make other things, or we can make a smaller club, because they're always handy to have, especially if you're doing woodwork and you want a little club to knock the end of your chisels. If you're doing carving, which is another thing I want to get into in the future and demonstrate on camera carving. But of course, it's not all about medieval life. So how are you all doing? Are you having a good day? What day is it? Is it Thursday or Wednesday? I forget some days because every day is the same. I get up, work and content. I think it's Thursday. It might be Wednesday. It's like I've had a few occasions when I just very suddenly, I don't know why, when I'm thinking about my PIN code for my bank card, and I just suddenly forgotten it. And if I think about it, I forget it. And I've only had that a couple of occasions recently. And it's only because I've had to use somebody else's card when I was doing a job. And then that just threw me out. And then I couldn't remember my own PIN number. It's a daft thing to do, isn't it? Because I remember it now and I know it all the time. I mean, I do remember things and I do remember numbers. It's always quite amazing how you can remember all the registrations of the cars you've had. Or you remember all your old telephone numbers. Or your old... I mean, I can remember from the 90s the telephone number when we had actual telephones. We had a red one and it used to light up. It was like made of plastic from the 80s. I can still remember that number. So it is always amazes me what we do remember as human beings. Anyway, cheers. Oh, yes. So whenever I'm going out, I'm always looking for bolts. So this is a modern bolt. It's quite a nice one, actually, but I'm going to take it apart and use it for the leather. Because I do want to put a bolt onto a shield at some point. Because all of my shields, they don't have any leather straps. And now some people say you should put the leather strap and it should start there and go to the other end down here. But I've seen videos where they say it should be offset, so it should be there and it should fasten up here. So that's the method I'm going to go for. And of course, if I can put a leather strap to them with a nice buckle, then I can think about doing other things on camera and maybe dressing more of a Huskard and doing a Huskard impression. And it's also a nice look. I actually really miss having that ability to sling a shield over my back when I'm in the videos. But again, this came from a charity bin because they're always throwing good leather away, but I'm always after and saving leather bolts. Of course, the buckle's modern, so that can go. I'll put it in a box and save it, of course, because I'm a bit of a hoarder. I don't throw things away that are good, and eventually that could be used for something else. I mean, it's not good for the Dark Ages, of course. So I'm always thinking about saving things. So let's just look at your comments. And then Hasdak says, I'm listening. Well, yes, great to see you here, Hasdak. You're always welcome, my friend. And at some point, if anybody wants to do a live stream with me, just let me know. And then I'll do it in the vertical position. And I'll click the ability to do a live stream together. Because apparently it's not in the horizontal. You can only do it in the vertical. And then what happens, I appear on half the screen and then you can appear on the other half the screen and then we can have a chat and you could hang about on the live stream if you ever wanted to. And I know Sam wants to do that in the future. So it's just quite simple, Sam, to do a live stream together. I just got to set it up from my end and then you just join with your phone. And then Sam says, thank you very much for that. I'm stuck here at work. Oh, I know. Work, eh? It's a bit of a devil, isn't it? And then Sam says, I thought of another stain my dad always would tell me was another stray or wicking or fishing will have whales. Dad always had little croats like that. Well, croats are such a very old thing, aren't they? I mean, croats have been around since, you know, we've learned to talk, and then they get passed down by generation to generation. And of course, as we got into the 17th, 18th and 19th century and the 20th century, people wrote books full of quotes, and I've got quite a few. And they're always fascinating to pick one of these quote dictionaries up, and then you can read what other famous people had said. But of course, that's also a source of videos, because some of those quotes and inspirational quotes would make quite good videos for YouTube. And then Sam says, do you want me to do the story of Earl's Great Escape with me this weekend? Well, yes, we could do that. Yeah, I've got no plan for the weekend so far. No, got no plans at all. Randomly, I got 5 pence in my pocket. I don't know why. And then stupidly last night, I managed to was, you know, you're not live until you do something stupid. And I did something a bit stupid last night. I was going to go out with my friend of mine called Ellie to go and pillage. She calls it pillaging. I call it dumpster diving. I think pillaging sounds a bit better. And because I've gone and researched and found a lot of areas where we know we could find things for free, I had to go outside and pump my car tyres up. I've got a big Volvo. It's a massive beast of a vehicle. So, you know, I got my electric pump, which came out of a charity bin by chance. And I was pumping up the tyres because my front tyres are really low. And I managed to flatten my battery. I never had that before, where I flattened my battery whilst pumping up my tyres, and it must have took an hour. So I didn't switch the engine on, and I should have done, because I'm not used to putting my tyres up. Normally I go to the garage when I can actually figure out how to get one of those pumpy things to work. So that was a stupid mistake I made last night. So I had to text my neighbour down there, one of the hippies, and say, can I borrow your battery charger? Because I do have one in the house, but I just can't find it. And it could take me a few hours. It could take me a few days, or it could take me a few weeks. Because you can always guarantee when you want to go, why is it? You know, you want to go and find something like, you know, your favourite file, or maybe you want to go and find, you know, your favourite DVD, or maybe your favourite axe. And you go and look for it, and no matter where you look for it, you can't find it. And this must be a very old thing. I don't know why it happens. And then the day when you're not looking is the day you find it, when you're looking for something else. Always makes me laugh, that does. But I am missing at the moment an axe. And I don't know where it is. and it's a big axe. It's as big as this one, and it's on a short handle. It's a war axe, and I've been looking for it all over the place. And I don't know if I left it in the garden. I don't know if it's tucked away somewhere else. I don't know if it's down the workshop. So I'm trying to search for that at the moment. I'm hoping I may have left it in the garden during an episode of filming, and I've hung it on a tree like I did the other one. But I really wanted to use it in a video. It's a really decent war axe. And then Sam says, do please leave a comment if you are shy, just leave an emoji or just say hi, you're more than welcome to. I'm a great fan of dumpster diving. You wouldn't believe some of the stories I have for you when I was dumpster diving. I even got my 7-year-old daughter into it. Yeah, it's a really amazing thing to get into. And of course, that's fundamentally why I made that Dave the Cat video, which was out today, in the vertical format, not the horizontal format of Dave going dumpster diving. It's just a fundamental tribute to dumpster diving, and I got Dave the Cat going around some Christian monasteries and finding some cool things, but you do find some amazing things. I mean, I've had some really good axes and tools, and whole boxes of tools out of skips. Why do people throw them away? Brand new things. Mobile phones. I mean, I've had iPhones, Samsungs, you name it. I must be lucky because I can just go randomly and pick up a bag of rubbish and there'll be 2 phones in there. So I must have the luck when it comes to dumpster diving, and having that ability to go and, pick up a bag and find, a nice Armani suit, genuine deal, or a load of Adidas, tops brand new, or whatever. And or 19th century paintings. I found a few of them, but I have to be careful and not do it too much, because it's very difficult not to take everything and not to take all the good stuff. So I'm trying to train myself not to take too much stuff when I go dumpster diving, because I got a big car and I think to myself, oh yeah, that's good, I'm having this, I'm having that. So I'm training myself, and I did quite well the other night, because I kept saying to Ellie, look, Ellie, I would have had that even. Her name's Ellie, the lady I go with. Said, look at that, I would have had that last year. I'm throwing it away now. I don't want it. So I am training myself not to take too much and just be very selective. But it's also pretty disgusting and amazing what charity shops throw out. They really do. I mean, charity shops, they're meant to be for charities and making money for homeless people or for animals, but they throw out so much stuff, it's unbelievable. Even to the point where it's not even being opened up. You find a whole bag of clothes and they're not even bothered to look through the clothes to see anything in there they could sell. And they just throw it in the bin. I mean, charity shops should be ashamed of themselves, really. And I don't think that they're fundamentally charity shops anymore, because they all have a manager. The manager's on £40,000-50,000 a year. They all have, full-time staff, and they're paid, of course. So it's a business these days. And I've seen people, go out in charity bins and or industrial bins and pull out, a camera worth £3,000, because the business that's using it, I've used it a few times and upgraded, and they just throw it away. I mean, I need to go and find somewhere that makes a load of Viking stuff and see what they throw away, but I don't think I'm that lucky. Then Sam says, I found over $1,000 worth of tools one day, and then next week got a year's supply of jerky. But again, I mean, you'll see it, especially in America, you'll go to a whole skip, and the whole skip is just full of meat, and a lot of it will be frozen. So they try to take as much as they can and give it away to charity and to homeless people. So it's a damn shock. And then Soliant Roy says, would love to get into house clearances for stuff like that. Well, yeah, again, house clearances is another aspect of it. But generally with a house clearance, you also sometimes have to clean the house. And of course, you're going to, I know of a skip from a house clearing business, and I've been in it a few times. I've had some nice things out of it. But a lot of the times, they've got some massive industrial shipping containers, so a lot of the stuff they keep and then they sell it on car boots when they go to markets, or they sell it to people that sell on eBay. But if you've got the money and you've got the space and you've got a warehouse, and certainly going and doing house clearances, if you get and a lot of that comes from solicitors as well. So if you're doing house clearance, we got a load of solicitors, because when somebody passes away and they've got to deal with the estate, a lot of the time the family don't want to deal with what's in the house. They just want rid of it and gone. So often they'll actually pay you. And I've got a friend of mine who used to do that, and the solicitor would phone him up and say, right, we've got a house need clearing, we'll give you £1,000 if you can clear it in 2 days. And so he'll go along, he has a number of staff, and then he'll sell it online, he'll go to car boots, and he's already made £1,000 out of it, and he's making another £3,000 to £5,000 over a few weeks, selling all the rest of the stuff on. But you also get a lot of stuff which is no good, and then you got that responsibility of getting rid of the rubbish. And then it's also the same with like people who collect things. I mean, I have a friend of mine, and I really want to get back into this hobby of wargaming, because I used to be a second-hand wargame dealer on eBay, and I had my own website, and I literally, had tens of thousands of wargame figures at one point. But the guy I get it from is one of the biggest second-hand wargame dealers, if not in the UK, probably in the world. He's absolutely massive, and he's got like 100,000 lots on eBay when it comes to Warhammer and wargaming. So we've got a comment here from Offer 10. Hello, nice to see you, my friend. And then Sam says, here in America, we are so wasteful, you wouldn't believe the things that people throw away. Well, it's the same all over. I mean, I watched a channel from Australia, and the guy just goes along with his big wagon, and people just leave stuff outside the house. And he goes through, he gets all the scrap metal, anything nice, it's worth something, he puts that in the back of his wagon. And you see him doing that every day. But it can take over your life. And of course, you need to have the space to store it all, because, yeah, you're going to have a lot of items and they'll go quickly, but you're going to have those items that linger on, that won't sell. But certainly, I mean, as a YouTube person I follow called Dumpster Diving UK in England, called Martin, and he collects all the scrap metal, he takes all the good stuff, he gives some away, but he also sells stuff. And the amount of stuff that I've seen him take, and find is incredible. It really is. I just don't think we're in a very good area for it when it comes to finding stuff in skips and in waste bins, because of the area we live in. And then Sam waves, hello, waving. And it's probably the same throughout history, because we've always been throwing stuff away. Although our ancestors, they had that deeper understanding about trying to recycle stuff. But then again, you look at the Coppergate helmet, and you look at all the stuff that's been found in the ground in rubbish pits. We do throw stuff away. We do, throw a sword down into the, the pit where your toilet is. Let's face it, if you're on a medieval toilet and your favourite sea axe or your favourite axe or sword falls into the pit and it's full of crap, well, you're most probably not going to go and get it back, are you? Unless, you're very choosy about what you just dropped. And of course, they find stuff like that all the time. It's amazing what people throw away. But we are very wasteful. And the thing is, we've got to think about the future when we're running out of commodities, we're running out of material, metals and plastics, we're running out of oil. So we're throwing all this stuff away into landfill. And at some point, we're going to dig up all those landfills, because that's a massive source of material. I mean, you think about all the silver and all the gold, you think about all the, the good materials, the aluminium, the steel, the brass, the copper that's in landfill. So at some point in the future, it will become profitable to dig up the landfill and actually recycle it properly. Because there's only so much brass in the world. There's only going to be so much copper. And yeah, we are quite good at scrapping it and dealing with it that way. But because humanity is increasing, and in my lifetime, in your lifetime, there'll probably be 8 or 9 billion people on the planet. We're going to need to save all this. And of course, we need all the copper and brass, and we need all these rare materials for, all the future computing we're going to need to manage all the AI and all the other programs and YouTube and whatnot. I mean, how many mobile phones end up being thrown away into skips when I found them? So we've all, I predict, get to a point where we'll dig up these landfills. And that was another thing I used to be into, was bottle digging. And certainly near me, there's an old Victorian, tip. And in the wintertime, you walk about and you'll find, bottles which are 120 years old, and, sometimes they're broken, but sometimes now and again, because of all the rabbits and all the creatures digging them up, the rats, you think about that. But, so you go along and you find, Victorian bottles. And I found quite a few. I've got quite a few nice Victorian bottles, medicine bottles, and the daily bottles of the day. And I know another place where there's a very good tip, and that'll be full of antique bottles. And some of these bottles can be worth a lot of money. For instance, if you find yourself one of these very rare cod bottles, which is a beer bottle, but it's not got the traditional flat bottom. It's just got a dome, so you can't stand it up. But some of those bottles are worth £3,000 to £6,000, £7,000 or £8,000 a piece. And I found one once, and it was worth, and I told a guy, I had a guy come round who wanted to talk to me about bottle digging, and when I was getting into it, and I showed him my bottles, and he saw this beer bottle, and he said, "Oh, bloody hell." I said, "Do you know how much this is worth?" I said, "No." He said, "This is worth a few £1,000s." And then he came round again, and he said, "Would you sell it to me?" I said, "Well, yeah, how much you give me?" And he put me over £1,000 in my hand and just bought this bottle, which took me 5 minutes to find. Then, hey presto, £1,000, and he probably sold it on for £2,000. It don't really matter, because I found it was free. But you'd be surprised at how much some of these old beer bottles and medicine bottles can be worth. And you see people on YouTube, they'll go along and especially in America, they'll go to the American West and look for old farmsteads, and they'll dig into the ground where the old tips used to be. And then the other day I saw a video, it was digging up a part of a battlefield which isn't registered, and the guy was, dug a 20-foot pit, and at the bottom of it he found a big wooden chest, and it had a load of American Civil War hats in it, from the war. And some of them were in really, really good condition. Something fell down, never mind. So it's also amazing, and some of these videos that go along in America and dig up old places, and they'll find beer bottles and knives, and some of it will be in really good condition, considering the type of soil it's stored in. So yeah, it's amazing. And it's the same with Norse and Viking stuff, because people have been walking about the Norwegian mountains, and they'll look behind a rock and they'll find an actual original Viking sword that's left there, all rusty. So I mean, there was one in Iceland where a guy was walking over one of these massive fields of rocks, just a natural outcrop, and in a crevice he found a actual Viking sword. And I think it's in one of the Icelandic museums now, and that's amazing. And then there's a really nice video from the BBC where it shows you in Norway where the ice is receding and melting away in the mountains, and they're finding like medieval arrows, and they're finding prehistoric stuff and Iron Age items and wooden bowls, because it's all been kept under the ice and it's all appearing now, and they've got to go and look for it every year, save it. If not, it deteriorates, and then they lose these archaeological items. So that's also really amazing to think about, in these remote places where the ice is melting away because of the fact that the planet's heating up, not because of really global warming. It's because it's a natural process of what we go through, and the Earth goes through these disaster cycles, like the Heinrich cycle and age, and if we're heading for one of them in the world, and that's quite a scary thing to think about what we're heading for. And let's hope we're not, but the chances are we're heading within a few lifetimes that. Then I watched a video the other night. It was from a guy called Hector Cole, and Hector Cole is a elderly blacksmith, and they was showing you this medieval arrow which has been found. And so another guy who's a bow maker in the UK, and I can't quite remember his name. He's got a YouTube channel, and he's if you want an English longbow, then he's one of the people to go to, and it'll cost you like £500 to £1,000, and And the guy was at a reenactment event, and somebody gave him this arrow, saying this is the medieval arrow. And the story was a guy was working in a medieval barn, and he found it on top of a rafter, or he found it in the side of the wall, hidden away. And you got the arrowhead, and it's got some of the feathers left on it, and they're speculating whether it is an actual medieval arrow, but it does look really old. So that's, if you just type in Hector Cole medieval arrow, you'll see that video, and that's quite fascinating. I don't think it's not long been published, so people are finding stuff like that all the time. I mean, I've known builders, especially in World War II, because in World War II we had a habit of burying ammunition in walls, because if the Germans invaded Britain, we're going to need all this, all these bullets and all these ammunition. So sometimes builders, they'll be knocking down a wall from an old building, and behind the wall or hidden away, they'll find boxes and boxes and crates of bullets. Then they generally have to get the army in to get rid of them, because they're potentially quite dangerous. And I've certainly known builders that's happened to. But then again, we've been doing that ever since we had the ability to throw stuff away. I mean, people have found medieval manuscripts hidden behind walls, for instance, or behind panelling that have been hidden away. Because, when certain times in history, when these books were not allowed, people hid them. So we've always been hiding things, and hiding things behind your wall is a very quick and easy way to do it. So, yeah, then Opperten says, same here, amazing what people throw. It is. And we've been doing it ever since we had stuff. Ever since we, from living in caves up to today, we've been throwing stuff away. And no doubt in the future, we'll be throwing more stuff away, because we've not learnt that lesson when it comes to recycling things. And then Sam says, the three-bladed Viking arrowhead that was found in the glacier, I am going to try and reproduce. I've already told up for waiting on the new forges to come in. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I've got two forges to bring down, but I've got to take them all apart and unscrew them so that I can get them in my car. And then I've got to work on an area outside where I can have them, and then have a tarpaulin put, because I can't have them in the house with a garage, because I can't do blacksmithing in the garage. But I do want to have a proper big size forge. And then I've got some handhold pumping systems. You can handhold and crank them up to get the air in. And I've got an electric pump which I bought from India, and it was not too expensive, but it's only 50, 60 quid. But I must say, it's a really good pump for pumping on the air through a forge. And then I'm also thinking about making a Viking one, because I've got an old table, like an outside table, but the tabletop itself is gone fundamentally. So I've ended up with a wooden frame, and I looked at that frame and I think to myself, well, yeah, actually, I could convert that frame, put a new top on it, build it up at the side, and actually build, get some sand and some clay and actually build a Norse Viking medieval forge. So that's another thing I'm going to think about doing. And if I do that, I'm going to do it on camera and make it into a series, because I think that'll be quite fascinating. And then Opperten says, Sam, that is interesting. Yes, it is, because you type in, and I think certainly there's going to be quite a bit of, video evidence on the channel about the glaciers melting away in Iceland and in Scandinavia, and probably in other places where, they're finding, arrowheads from the Iron Age and the Viking period and the Vendel period and later, because those things have always, gone under the ice and they've been preserved. But what they have to do is you have to go and get them quickly, because if they don't, they deteriorate and oxidize, and then the wood starts to collapse and break apart, and then you end up with an item that's not savable. So that's a really amazing thing. And if I do find that video from the BBC, I'll try to share it on the channel. But we do have a new feature on the channel on the community post I saw the other day. I don't know if you guys are aware of it yet. It's a community post section for you guys to post things onto my community page. So, for instance, you're watching YouTube, or you find a video, you think, oh yeah, I'll share that with Braggy, and I'll share it with the audience on Northworthy. Well, you can do that now. Or let's say you're reading an article about, you know, Viking brooches or about an axe or anything like that. You can fundamentally, it's your page for sharing things on the community page. So it must be a very new YouTube feature, that, because I've only seen it for a few days. So it must be very new. And I can't wait until about a year's time when we're going to get A/B testing on titles, because we've already got A/B testing, and if you don't know what that is, I'll explain in a minute. So we've got A/B testing on thumbnails, and what that basically is, so on some of my long format videos, you'll sometimes see the thumbnail changing, because you can upload up to 3 different thumbnails, and then what YouTube does is just rotate them around and test them to see what your audience, you know, clicks on the most. And, you know, at the moment, we don't probably have a big enough audience to get the results back, but I find that to be quite useful. But I do know that YouTube have been working and are slowly releasing A/B testing for your titles, so that, you know, you could have 3 different titles for your video, and this will be for the long format, and then you can put 3 different titles out. You know, you can go and use AI or do it yourself. I think AI helps to make a better title, but you also need to adjust it with that human touch, because it's all right, but we're not AI ourselves, are we? So we read things as human beings, and you need to get that human approach so that we understand fundamentally what that video is about. So A/B testing for titles would be fascinating and be quite helpful, because if you can have up to 3 titles on your long format, it'd be really good if we could do it on the shorts format as well, because that would really help as well. But I don't think they're doing it on the shorts. But yeah, so A/B testing is where you get to test, and this all came about because of vidIQ and TubeBuddy, the 2 apps I sometimes use. I have paid for them before, but I don't pay for them at the moment. But they fundamentally created and started doing A/B testing through their, you know, subscription services. So yeah, I've got to pour the rest of this beer out. If you're not seeing it, I'm having a Banksy's. It's called Banks, but we call it Banksy's. I'll tell you what, it's a very nice beer. And I thought to myself today, I thought, oh, I deserve a beer. I got some beer in, why not have one? I'm just watching the beer as I pour it in. I don't want to waste any, because that'll be a sacrilege, wasting your beer. I got some lemonade in it, so it's more of a shandy. Although now I got some more beer, it's going to be a little bit stronger. Yeah, and then Offer 10 says, Sam, that's interesting. I read that one. Offer 10, thank you. You can check it out on my channel, and do go and check out Sam's channel if you're into smithing, or just give him a support and a subscription, because it all helps. And not enough YouTubers do this when they give the smaller guy, and I don't mean in size, I don't mean Sam's like down here in height, you know, he's probably bigger than me and stronger than me, but, you know, it's a smaller YouTube channel, but he's heading towards 1,000 subscribers. I think you're not far from 600, are you? So it's always good as a bigger content creator, as a larger channel, to give a shout out, you know, to help, you know, the smaller YouTubers out, because that really does help. I mean, let's face it, I mean, people love to get shout outs, and I've never really gone out my way to ask for shout outs, but I'm more than happy to do shout outs and to help the smaller channels to grow, because it's not just my journey, it's your journey and their journey. So why make it difficult for people and for content creators? So, you know, go and support Sam, and after the live stream, of course, and give him a subscription and check out some of his videos when he's making things, and he's got all various sort of videos. I saw one the other day of your cat eating your cereal. That made me laugh. Oh, Tubbs, he's being very naughty cat. Yeah, so I've done medieval arrowheads, but want to do this new find in the glacier, the 3-bladed arrowhead. Yeah, I'd love to see that and have a look at it, because there's so many different designs of arrowheads. That's the thing, and I really want to get into it myself and try to make a few. I used to make arrowheads on camp, and I made a few over my years, but I think I gave most of them away. And I made a few little, you know, like spearheads and so forth, like, you know. something a bit like this. I made a few of these in my time. Not the most difficult thing to make, but practice makes perfect. And then I got to go down to the farm where I got my workshop and go and retrieve a massive log section, which is about 1 foot wide and about 4 foot wide, so that I can mount it in the garden and have it as a spear javelin target. And then we could do some of that on the channel. And if I get 2 of them and I make some kind of a setup and add some posts, I can make an axe throwing target. And then we could introduce axe throwing and get a few of my sharp axes I've got and actually do some axe throwing on the channel, because I think that would be quite fascinating. What do you think? I used to love doing axe throwing. I used to do it up my local wood up there. There was a massive old, I think it was a beech tree, which came down in the wind, but some of it was left and had died off. And then me and my mate used to go up the local park with a Viking axe, and we'll just take it in turns to throw this axe into this old dead tree. I mean, God knows what all the dog walkers were thinking, of course. You know, there you are walking the dog, and suddenly you go around a corner and there's 2 big hairy guys, one with a big beard, not me, throwing an axe into a tree. And it's really loud as well. It makes a really not loud noise. And I think about axe throwing, you know, it's not about the throwing technique, it's about the distance between the target and yourself. Because if you don't get the distance right and the axe doesn't have given enough time to rotate round, so you got your axe, so your axe don't have enough distance and the right distance, it's not going to hit the tree and land on the axe head. So you got to get your distance right. That's the secret when it comes to axe throwing. And this is just another combat axe. Again, it's blunt, but it's got a slight beard section to it. And this one is not upside down like the other one was, which I didn't realise. It's been like that for a while. Yeah. And then, oh yes, I got here one of my favourite sea axes I had. And this is such a lovely sea axe. This is another combat sea axe. So often we get asked in the videos, well, why isn't your sea axe, couldn't say it then, why has it not got a point to it? Why is it blunt? Because this is for combat. And this is a really good one, because the thing about this one was, if I was using a spear, I could hold it in my hand, whether I want to hold it on the blade as I'm thrusting away, and then I could drop my spear on the floor and then just go to this. And it was really handy because the handle is so small, I can hold it against my spear and use my spear thrusting at the enemy, the Saxons normally, or some Normans. And then I could literally either pull this back and go to my sea axe to get in for a close kill. And if you're quick, then it's very difficult for an armoured man. Even a man with chainmail and sword, you could take him out of one of these at close combat if you're faster than him. And then this was only £15, $20, and it's got such a lovely handle. It's a small handle, but it just fits in your hand perfectly. So yeah. And of course, I'm also sitting there next to my singing Dane axe. We'll show that in a minute. So Offerten says there's an excavation in Rosendal, southern Norway, where much has been preserved due to the clay and the Vikings and pre-Viking periods. Well, that's great, because those sort of digs and archaeological digs are going to give us the answers we don't fundamentally have. Like, you know, did they have leather on the inside of the leg bindings? Did they actually have sea boots? Because some modern Viking reenactment groups, if you go along with a sea boot, and a sea boot is basically just a turn shoe, but it's got a bit of leather high up and goes halfway up your leg, your lower leg, they'll say, oh no, you can't wear that because that's not authentic. And then, you know, some groups will say, no, you're not allowed to wear black wool because we never had black wool, even though when Egil Thorson, the late and great channel host, was digging out Jorvik in the 80s, he found a massive amount of black dye. So we know they had such colours, but some groups are just a little bit fussy when it comes to what they say we can have and what we can't have. And so, of course, the more we dig and the more we find, and the more we can say, yes, the Norse did have this. The Norse did have sea boots. They did have this style of boot. They did have these style of knives and saxes and axes. So that's going to be quite fascinating. And I wonder if any videos from the Rosendal archaeological dig. And of course, this is the thing about archaeology, is that we're always digging up new things and we're always progressing. I mean, and this is a good example when you look at the old, books about Vikings, and you look at the books and you compare one of the books from the 70s or the 80s compared to today. There's so much more information we know about the Norse and the Vikings. It's unbelievable, because we're learning every week and we're learning every year. And certainly programs like Time Team and Dig for Britain, I've found some fascinating things, and that's wonderful, really is. And then Sam says, thank you for your kind words. You truly are a great Viking brother. Well, thank you very much. That's what we're here for, because we're a happy big family and we all love one another, and we all, of that kindred spirit, and we all respect our ancestors. And that's what it's about on this channel. It's about ancestry, it's about heritage, and it's about where we come from. But it's also about, making the world a better place and having a laugh at the same time, because let's face it, I mean, I watch YouTube channels and some of them are really good channels, but they bore you to death. Oh, guy, I can't watch any more of this video because I'm just bored. So it's about being entertaining, but also using that method of entertaining to also teach you a few things. So fundamentally, if I could make a video and you're being entertained, and without you knowing that you've learned something, then that's really brilliant from my point of view. And the phrase I coined was, we're educators. We like to educate, or but entertain at the same point. So we're entertainers and we're educators. So that's what we fundamentally are. And why be boring? Because so many content creators are really boring. They really are at times. And I hope I'm not boring. And we have a comment here from Steven Dirty. So hello to you, and love to see you here in the comments. And he says, this is so trippy. Oh, well, I suppose it is, with the different colours in the background. And that's an old cloak and got some Viking wool. And this is my downstairs indoor film studio. And sometimes I film upstairs, and a lot of time I go in my garden and film. Because I don't want to be, in a video making it look like I'm in a modern house, especially if I'm dressed as a Viking. So I just try to go for this approach. And if we get the money and the coin, and what we mean by coin is the wealth and the spare money to go and invest and make one of these rooms look like an indoor longhouse, I will do. Because I think that'll be even better, having a nice proper wooden floor and having some wood on the sides and making it look like on camera you're in a longhouse. But of course, even better if they get the money to go and buy it and build a longhouse. Because you can go off to Germany, or there's various manufacturers over the Europe, for instance, that make timber frame buildings, and you can go along and say, right, I want to spend £50,000 or £20,000 and have a small wooden frame building built as my modern house. And they do that. There's people and businesses that will build you those constructions. And it's an art form, and quite amazingly, we've not lost that ability to go and reconstruct a longhouse. And then some people have that kind of a structure of a longhouse, but have it more modernised. So it's a modernised building, but it's still based and built around wood. And I think that's always quite fascinating. And then Sam says, I watched your cannabis video earlier today. It's true that the Vikings, there's no proof that they smoked. Yeah, I've never heard any evidence of the Norse or medieval people smoking. It came about when we discovered tobacco, when Columbus discovered it. But then again, we think to ourselves, well, if Lucky Leif Erikson, in the 10th century or 11th century went to Finland and America, could they not have travelled further down south and actually found tobacco? Were the native Indians at the time smoking tobacco? I think they probably were, but without actually thinking about it and doing some research, I couldn't fundamentally tell you that. But wouldn't that be amazing if they discovered the fact that the Vikings smoked? And it's a bit like this debate about firearms, how in Iceland they're debating that actually a very rudimental rustic firearm, because they're kind of saying that actually black powder was discovered by chance, and then somebody is basically saying that, well, because they found this type of barrel thing on a wooden construction or a bit remains of the wood, and they're kind of speculating that could it not actually be some kind of a very not fundamental, but a very basic type of a barrel to shoot off something out of the barrel. So there is some speculation about that, but again, because they've only found one of these barrel type things, and it's I've seen a few videos on it. It's a massive debate, so again, fascinating. And then Aaron says, people discovering that ancient groups weren't as primitive as they originally thought. Well, no, just because we judge them to be primitive and to be simpletons and not be very smart, but they were in many aspects. Our ancestors and the ancients and the medieval ancestors were probably smarter than us to a certain degree, because we judge ourselves by technology. But if you judge ourselves by the way we live and the way they live, perhaps they was a little bit smarter. I don't know. But they weren't primitive. Far from it, no. And then Sam says, Offerton says, Sam, we don't know for sure if they smoke cannabis or not. There is no evidence, but it's not impossible that the Vikings did it. Well, for instance, if they went to the Middle East, which they did as far as, Baghdad, I don't know at the time if those cultures were smoking or whether they had the ability to put it on a fire. But you don't need to fundamentally put it on a fire, do you? And just put it in a pipe or whatever, smoke it. I mean, I used to know a guy that was in the British Army, and there was in Afghanistan, and there was all the time confiscating cannabis. And so they take it back to the army base, and then they have a big bonfire and throw it all on the bonfire. But he used to tell me, he said, oh yeah, we found half a ton of cannabis and we've got to destroy it. So we put it on a big fire, set light to it, but then we stand around and then we can't help but getting stoned simply because there's that much smoke coming off. We just stand by it and we get high as a kite. So, you don't need to fundamentally smoke it. You can just put it, and it makes you think about other plants that could have that same effect, whether they, put that sort of thing on a fire. But of course, it's all speculation. We don't fundamentally know. But we do know that they had hemp seeds, and we do know that they knew about, we can't really relate cannabis today when it comes to cannabis in the past because it was different. And if you go back to the, the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, well, we didn't really have bud like we do today, because today's cannabis has been fastly cultivated under lights and it's changed the plant fundamentally so. But they did have, pollen, and they did have solids and stuff like that. And then Sam says, I wouldn't have figured it not cannabis, but other herbs and mushrooms were meant for some Native Americans in Arizona, and they talked about how they smoke buffalo turds. Well, yeah, I mean, it's probably more in their culture. But then again, we've always known about the herbs and the plants, and we've always known about taking magic mushrooms, for instance, because that's a very, very old thing in society. And there's always been an element of society which would take them, whether it's because of a purpose, whether it's because of a ritual. I mean, the shamanic culture, for instance, would use magic plants and the herbs they knew about to take themselves and put themselves in an alternative state. But then again, in shamanic culture, you could also do that because, through drumming. They would drum and drum and drum, and that beat, a bit like dance music, it kind of heightens the spirit, and you get yourself in a different plane and a different level of consciousness. But, a lot of these things we just don't know about because they're being lost, in society. And then Offerton says, they knew about opium. Oh, didn't know about opium, I didn't know that. And again, that's been used for tens of thousands of years. And, the British government certainly imported it all over China, didn't they, during the Opium Wars, which didn't really work out well for both parties. And, of course, Hashtag is saying hemp used for rope. Well, of course, hemp is such an old thing, and hemp being used for clothes and hemp being used for rope is such an old thing, it really is. And, hemp is a marvellous, amazing thing. I don't know why I'm still holding my singing Dane axe. Last orders. Yeah, as I'm going to own a pub, I'll have this hanging up for my last orders. And you may not know what that is in the UK. So if you're in a pub and you're getting towards 11 o'clock, they ring a bell. So they go, right, last orders. And then you got to go to the bar and get your last beer in. And then when it goes past the time when they're not allowed to serve anymore, which I think is like 20 past 11, they ring it again. Right, drink up. So they can get you to go home. I mean, and that's loud, isn't it? I like it when you wave it about, how it changes the resonance of it and the sound. But yeah, and I do think, in the UK, I don't know if you have that in America. Do you have last orders in America? Because I can't quite recall. Is there a time when you got to drink up and go home? And I do think in the UK that, the old last orders where you're not allowed to really drink past 20 past or past 11 at night is really draconian and really old-fashioned and hard, which is what that word means. And then on special occasions, like the King's birthday or some special event, sometimes like the World Cup, they sometimes let it go on a bit later on, like another hour. But that's very, very rare. Then we also have another thing and I don't know if you have it in America, what you call shut-ins. So a shut-in in a pub is when the landlord is very friendly and he would lock the pub up, but he'll have a few customers he likes stay in the pub. And then we'll have what you call a shut-in. But of course, if the police come round and see a light on, and bang on the door, that's a brick wall, don't really work, does it? Bang on the door. Right, what are you doing in there? And then they would, if they get caught, then they could lose their license. So, I've definitely been to a few pubs where we have shut-ins and we're drinking until 2 or 3 in the morning. But it's illegal and landlords shouldn't do it. But that's always been a thing with certain pubs and also in the underworld when it comes to, and I don't mean like the underworld when it comes to hell in the Viking whole Roman thing. I mean the criminality underworld. There's always been pubs associated with different things. So, for instance, there'll be a pub that's associated with buying and selling gold. It may not be legit. It may be stolen or whatnot. You may have a pub which is more well known for selling your drugs. You'll have a pub which is well known for having hookers and women of the night. So that's always happened in society. And those sort of places have always been and existed. And they exist today, certainly. From what I've heard and read, and from what I've been told by the various people I've met in my life. And then Sam says, last call for alcohol. That's what we say over here. So so it's not last orders. And then Sam says, you don't have to go home, but you can stay here. That's another thing at the bar. I just think it's really old-fashioned that in the modern world, that fair enough. You probably don't want your bar staying open till 5 in the morning, but then some places will have a special license, and you can certainly. When I used to go clubbing, there'll be certain pubs in town centres and certain nightclubs that will be open until 5 or 6 in the morning, because the amount of times I've gone clubbing and I've been drinking and partying all night, and then you leave the pub or you leave the venue and it's like daylight and it's the next day. Oh, bloody hell, is it 6 in the morning already? And then you walk back home to go to bed and then you get up again in the afternoon and start all over again. Such an old thing is that. And normally in the old days we used to just walk home 2 or 3 miles, get a kebab and walk home with it. But I remember one time when I used to live in Mickleover. I used to sometimes walk direct, or sometimes used to walk through a place called Littleover. And Littleover basically means small is little for Anglo-Saxon, and over is the word for hill. So Little Hill, and Mickleover is the opposite. Mickle is big, and of course over is hill again. So Mickleover, where I used to live, is called Big Hill. That's the Anglo-Saxon translation of it. So one time, a few occasions, I used to go through Littleover, and there used to be a fish and chip shop and a kebab that will stay open until 2 or 3 in the morning. So I can remember this one time, I was coming back, all my friends have gone home, and I'm the last person standing, which basically means if you're gone out and you're the last person standing, you're the last one having a beer. Everybody else has buggered off, either pulled a woman or just gone back home and not told you. Or have told you, you say, "Oh, I'm going now, Andy. I've had enough beer. It's 2 in the morning. I'll see you at work next week." So you'll be the last man standing. And on one occasion, I walked through Littleover, which was slightly longer in the distance than walking the straight way, the direct way. So I was hungry, and I thought, I'll go and get a bag of chips, French fries. So I went to this, this chippy. It was still open. It was like 2 in the morning, and I must have been the last person going in. But I said, "Well, can you give us a a bag of chips?" And said, "Oh yeah, that's no problem." And I think they saw me. I was drunk, and I think they did a trick on me because I thought, let's give them all the chips that are left over. So the bag of chips I had was ginormous. In fact, I had to hold it in both arms, and I don't know how I managed to eat the chips, but it was that massive and big. It must have been like 4 or 5 times the normal portion. And so there's me walking back home with this massive bag of chips in both arms, and I was putting my head down to bite into the chips to get a chip and try to hold the big bag of chips without dropping them, because I didn't want to waste any food. I was hungry, but I was drunk, so I didn't realise that I've got this massive bag of chips. It's not a bag, it's just wrapped in paper. So I'm going back home, I'm eating all these chips. But there's that many chips, I keep throwing them on the ground, right? Too many, throw them on the ground. It was literally the most biggest bag of chips you ever see in your life, because they literally gave me all the chips that are left in the fat fryer. So, I'm eating chips, I'm dropping some on the floor, a few more on the floor. And then the very next morning, I had to go to work to do a Saturday morning shift. It was a Friday night. And I drove through Mickleover. And then all the way from Mickleover into town, I could see where I was throwing the chips out on the floor. And there's basically a 2.5 mile long road. And I just kept seeing chips everywhere. Oh, yeah. And I used to have that when I went out with a girlfriend who worked at a chippy. And then she would come back with a massive, massive bag of kebab. And we'd just both sit round on my table. And then I'd have friends over when my parents were away. This was when my parents were alive. And they would just eat free kebab all night. And, literally, it'd be the most massive mound of kebab. And doner meat and sheath meat and all the meat that was left over, which they couldn't get rid of and didn't want to throw. So they used to give it to the staff. Oh, those were the days. And I do like a kebab now and again. But what is your favourite topping for a kebab, if you know what a kebab is? I think I like a bit of mint, a bit of barbecue sauce, and a slight little bit of chilli, but no salad. Just forget the salad. I don't want that on my kebab. I mean, that's an insult, that is. No salads, please. Just give me the kebab with some nice hot chilli and some barbecue sauce and mint, and I'm quite happy. On a big naan bread, of course. Oh, wait a minute, I've got some naan breads in my fridge. I could put some cheese on it in a bit and put it in my air fryer. I tell you what, you put a naan bread with a bit of cheese on top in the air fryer. Oh my God, it's lovely, that is. Oh. But I could start doing some cooking videos on the channel, cooking with Bruggy. I'd use an air fryer. But then I also like, sometimes I have what you call cheese on a plate. So you get a hot plate and you get a grater and you grate a load of cheese on it, put it in the oven. Or you can get some eggs, you get your plate. Sometimes it's a porcelain plate, or sometimes you may choose to put it in a metal, baking tray. And you get 3 or 4 eggs, and you break the eggs in. And then you grate a load of cheese on top, put it in the oven, hot as you can. 5-10 minutes later, it's all lovely and baked and golden brown. And then a couple of slices of bread. And that's nice. And then there's another method, which is you get a plate, and you get some milk, and then you just very gently grate the cheese on top, and then you put that in the oven, and you end up with this really nice concoction. But I do prefer, cheese on a plate with cheese or some eggs, and I'll tell you what, that's to die for. It's very simple, and some days when you want to cook something, you don't want to go for the old bloody hassle of cooking a roast dinner. some days it's just nice to be able to cook something very simple which will fill you up. And I do like my food, and I probably ate too much food recently because I put too much weight on, and now I've got to go through the rigmaroles of trying to lose a bit. I need to not do any shopping and do some fasting. I do periodically in my life. I go through, times when I don't eat a lot and I'll fast, and then through that time period of a few weeks I'll lose half a stone or stone in weight, and then I'm back to my normal, or hopefully below normal weight, and then I can go and buy some nice food and put it back on again and then burn it off again. And then Sam says, I take my bread, put a layer of mayonnaise and then the cheese under the boiler. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do like a bit of salad sauce with a bit of cheese and some tuna or mackerel in tomato sauce. That's quite nice. Anyway, cheers everybody. Good health. Was hail in Anglo-Saxon is what that means. Good health. Or slanger in Norse, slanger or slange. But it's but I like to think about that and do a video on all the different ways you could toast somebody on all the different languages, because there really are a lot of ways, whether it's Scottish or Welsh or French, and all these cultures all have their own individual way and a little saying when they put the beer in the air and do a toast. And it makes you think how old that is. It must go back to the Iron Age, and probably goes back to the Bronze Age, really. And then Sam says, and don't forget, do please leave a comment if you're watching. If you're new, please tell us you're new, because I can give you a nice warm welcome to the channel. And if you've got any questions, you can ask me anything, really. I don't mind. I love to be asked random questions, and especially ones that I can't answer, but I will try to answer. So Sam says, I remember when I was younger, me and Dad were pretty poor, and we would do same sticks. It's a stick of butter dipped in sugar, cheaper than ice cream. Well, yeah, again, having a sugar sandwich goes back to World War II. And also, my dad used to like a tin of fruit, in the juice, and have bread and butter with it. So these sort of things go way back in time. It's because when we had simpler food and we didn't have a lot of food, you made sure you try to, use what you can. And we've got a comment here from King Edward, the Turbulent. Oh, lovely to see you here, King Edward. We salute you. And he says, Neil, Giant Slayer, Tank, hi. Oh, that's your name. King Edward, the Turbulent, Neil, Giant Slayer, Tank. And he says, hi. Well, hi, King Edward. I always like and read your comments. I always enjoyed seeing them on the videos. And it's lovely to see you here in a live stream. You're very welcome, and a warm welcome to Northworthy. And if you don't know what Northworthy is, so Northworthy is where I come from. I come from the city called Derby. Derby's famous for Rolls Royce, and we've got a football team which is not very good called the Rams. And back in World War II, because we had a lot of Americans over here before Normandy, they converted what you call the baseball ground, what it used to be, into a baseball pitch, and that's where we get the old football stadium called the baseball ground. It don't exist anymore. They knocked it down. So we're also famous for Royal Crown Derby pottery, Denby pottery. It's not far away. Allegedly, the man that invented the hot dog came from Derby. Although I think, to be fair, there's a lot of claims across the world of people saying, no, I've invented the hot dog. Oh, no, we invented the hot dog. But Derby is also famous for being one of the most haunted cities in England, because we've got tons of ghosts in Derby. And we have a guy called Richard Felix, who I used to know, not seen him for a long time, who used to be on a famous ghost hunting program called Most Haunted. And he's got some really good videos from years ago going around different cities and talking about the ghost stories. And I have started to film the ghost stories of Derby because I think it would make really good content for the channel. And I've started to film some of the local history as well. And then we have Michael Potts. Hey, brother, from Florida, USA. Oh, it's lovely to see you here, Michael. How are you today? And how are you, King Edward? Are you both having a good day? And then Michael says, I thought all of England is haunted. Well, yes, there's an awful lot of places in the UK are haunted. And in fact, this very room is said to be haunted by a ghost. So if you ever see some shadowy figures around me, let me know, because I don't want to get scared. I'd have to get my Dane axe out and try to axe the ghost. And of course, we also around here have a local legend of a werewolf, which is in Chellaston, the Chellaston werewolf. But I used to be a werewolf, but I'm all right now. Sorry, it's an old joke. So that's my friend, the lady from Alistair, who you sometimes see on the channel in the comments in the live streams. She reminded me of that joke last night, and she beat me to it. But that's such an old joke. But no, there is an actual werewolf legend in Chellaston. And I was going to record the story and make a folktale out of it, but at the time I didn't have enough evidence and enough material. And I tried to film it, but the story didn't really work out on video. But I now got to the stage where I think to myself, yeah, I've got enough of a story to tell about the story of Chellaston. But it's all about this old church. Well, I don't know at the moment. I'm still doing some research, so, and I don't really know. There's not many werewolf stories from England because we don't have that many werewolf legends. It's more of a European thing. Now, I could probably make you a Dave the Cat werewolf story live on camera. That wouldn't be a problem, to be fair, because I'm quite good as a storyteller, and it won't take me too much. And I certainly know I think it's the Danish story of the werewolf of Beauregard. I know that one off by heart. So I could tell you that one if you so desired me to tell you a Scandinavian werewolf story, because there are quite a few werewolf stories from Scandinavia. And there's quite a few from Belgium, and there's quite a few from France. But in the UK, we don't really have a massive amount of legends when it comes to the werewolf. Although we do have a modern werewolf from a place called Flixton in Yorkshire on the coast, which is that direction, about 100 miles away. And the Flixton werewolf is a modern werewolf sighting, which has been seen by lots of people. People like sitting in a house and they look outside and they see this massive 8-foot tall werewolf on the lawn. And then it's been seen by people driving the cars, and the werewolf's been chasing the cars. And there's a guy on YouTube called Sinclair, his last name is. What's his first name? I'm thinking of Clive Sinclair, but that's the inventor. I forget now. Truth Proof is the channel. And I do very rarely I watch his live streams, but he's got a documentary on Amazon about the Flixton werewolf. But I think you have to pay for it, and I'm just too tight-fisted. When I say tight-fisted, it just means I'm just, too reserved in spending the money to go and watch it. And then Michael Potts says, I love ghost shows, and it just seems all of it is haunted. Yes, well, because we've got that much history in the UK which goes way back in time, and because so many people have invaded Britain, from the Celts to the Romans to the Saxons and the Jutes and the Angles and the Frisians, and then the Vikings, the Norse, and then the Normans. And then after that, it kind of like went downhill because nobody really invaded after that. Thank God in World War II, the Germans didn't invade, which would have really dramatically changed Britain. I think that was a really massive mistake by the Germans, because they should have invaded us. But then, we was all ready and prepared to go. And then just go back to your comments. I do love always reading your comments. And then Hashtag says, my bungalow is haunted. Things disappear, then turn up a few weeks later. Well, it may be a boggart, may not be a ghost. It could be sort of like a boggart, or one of those sort of creatures, because they're very well known for hiding things, for blunting your axe, for hiding your axe, making your horse go lame, nicking your plough. And so it could be a boggart, and it may not be fundamentally a ghost. But then again, ghosts do take things. I can remember many years ago, I had a friend of mine called Mark. His name was Mark Longhair, was what we called him, because he had very long hair. And he came from a place called Blackpool, which is in Lancashire. And it's in that direction, about 100 miles away. And I went up a few times to his house. And he said, you can come along and stay with me, but I must let you know, Andy, that's my real name. I wasn't really called Braggy then. This is in the 90s. So my house is haunted. Well, of course, when somebody says to you that your house is haunted, you don't always believe it, do you? So there we were, sitting in his lounge, having a few beers, partaking, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a lighter, like a lighter, round lighter, a Zippo, just appeared and just landed on the floor. And I thought, how was that about? And he said, oh, that's my ghost. I lost that a few weeks back. So it just manifested itself. And I thought, I went through it all in my mind. I thought, well, did Mark throw it in the air? Well, I was right next to him. I didn't see him throw a lighter. I just saw it suddenly in front of me. It was about 2 feet away, about here. A lighter just appear and drop. And to this day, it's never escaped my mind. And then I was walking downstairs to go to his toilet, and I saw this black figure standing on the stairs, and like a shadowy figure. I thought that was a bit spooky. And I said, well, that's just my ghost. Don't worry about it. It takes things. And some days you may see it, or some days you don't, or some days you may see it in your peripheral vision, and you're not looking, but you can see something without looking. And I said, don't worry about it. It don't do any harm. I'll live with it. But, how can you explain a lighter just appearing and manifesting in the air in front of you? And it wasn't like drunk. It wasn't like massively high. It was just, like in a normal state. And yet it just appeared out of nowhere, manifested itself. Suddenly in the air, a lighter appeared. And then you just saw it in slow motion just drop to the floor and make a loud clang on this wooden floor. So that was quite spooky. And then King Edward says, my clan's castle, Kizzy Mule Castle, is haunted. There's a male ghost in the MacNeil of Bower, ancient tartan, sorry, the message is going, great kilt with a musket rifle on his right shoulder. Yeah, that would be correct. That would be a right shoulder shift, technically. Very good way to carry your arms. And a woman ghost in a white dress. Well, a little bit of information about Eggle. So Eggle had a friend of his called Napier. That was his last name. And this guy called Napier, he very rarely appears on the channel, made him an official member of his clan. So Eggle was a member of the Napier clan. And then Hashtag says, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? Well, it's a fascinating and interesting thing to think about Bigfoot. Does Bigfoot exist? Does the Yeti exist? The Yowie? No matter where you go in the world, there seems to be some legend about a tall, big, hairy creature. And no doubt some of them are tall and much taller than human beings, because people have seen them where they're 8 or 9 foot tall, and then some of them can be a bit shorter. And I know in Derbyshire there was a very famous Bigfoot sighting in the 1980s, and basically a big hairy man was seen crossing a road near a bridge, and it kind of like leapt over the road. And if the average length and size of the road is probably, I don't know, 14 to 16 foot, 4 or 5 meters in diameter, and it seems to have leapt in 2 big steps over this road and then leapt over a bridge. And if you go, there's a channel, what's her name? Deborah Hatswell. There's a woman on YouTube called Deborah Hatswell, and she has a massive, well, not a massive content channel, but she's got a big channel, and she talks about cryptids, and that story of the Derbyshire Bigfoot is on there. And it's about 45 minutes long, and she talks about all the evidence. And I think one day we'll try to locate the place and go and do a video there and make a story about it. But certainly, you think about the Green Man and the legends of the Green Man, of a hairy bipedal creature in the woods. And you think about all these different legends, there's certainly something to it. And of course, what is Bigfoot? Is Bigfoot an actual creature? Is it a multi-dimensional creature that we sometimes see but has the ability to disappear? Is it some alien from space that's been left on the planet? Is it actually an alien from space that's just come out of the air, out of its craft and is walking about a bit? But certainly, there's lots of legends and there's lots of, evidence to point at Bigfoot being a real thing. And certainly in the UK, if you go to the Truth Proof channel by the guy called Sinclair, can't remember his first name. Paul Sinclair, that's his name. Just come to me in my mind. So the guy called Paul Sinclair, he runs a channel called Truth Proof, and he's got lots of videos of people seeing these really strange creatures, like people that have, gone camping in a wood and they've encountered werewolves, and they've encountered Bigfoot. And I think the werewolves seem to be a little bit more scary to me than the Bigfoot, because some people have had really frightening encounters with werewolves, of the shapeshifters. So there's certainly something to it. And there's certainly wasn't there that channel many years ago on YouTube that had some really amazing photographs. You could see the Bigfoot hiding, and this was well before AI, where you saw, photographs and you just saw an up close picture of a face, and it wasn't human, but it looked slightly human, but it was very furry and hairy. So certainly, I think there's certainly something to it. But what are they? And how do we prove that Bigfoot are real? I mean, there's certainly been occasions and some people that have claimed to have shot Bigfoot, aren't they? Frozen the bodies, but somehow, they have disappeared. And then there's a very good lecture about some of the big tombs in America, some of the barrows, which go way back in history, way before European people went over there. And to talk about it in the 19th century, where they gone and discovered these massive tombs, and they found really massive skeletons, which are like 8 or 9 foot tall with massive heads. And of course, there's lots of fake content about that online. But a lot of these finds ended up written in the local papers. Well, then the evidence was, had disappeared. And then certainly, you think about some of these photographs from the Wild West showing pterodactyls, where you got all these cowboys and they're holding out. It'd be like 10 cowboys and they've got a pterodactyl and spread the wings out. I mean, are some of them real? So there's lots of things that are hidden in history, and there's lots of forbidden history and forbidden things that we don't know about and have been hidden from, society. I mean, for instance, what if the dinosaurs actually lived much longer than what we thought? Because you certainly got claims in Africa, like in the Congo, of people seeing dinosaurs up to the modern age, up to today. Well, maybe not today, but up to this period in history. So did the dinosaurs die out when the meteorite struck the planet and killed them all off? Did some of them survive and actually, are still around? That's another debate. Because there's a guy on YouTube, I can't remember his name, but he makes documentaries about the dinosaurs, and he talks about the fact that sometimes when they find dinosaur remains, they're finding some of the fleshy bits which are still around. And I'm not talking about people finding stuff that's frozen, because let's face it, I mean, they found some fantastic mammoth finds, including, whole baby mammoths that have been frozen in the ice. So that's quite amazing. So it does make you think whether actually, there's more going on in the world than what we're told. But then I think about, well, let's just take Bigfoot to the UK. So let's say on this hand that Bigfoot is a real thing and a real creature. It's a creature that survives in the wild, eats deer, then can hunt for them, and lives in little communities, reproduces. You get female Bigfoots and male Bigfoots, and they mate and have little baby Bigfoots, and then they're surviving in the wilds. So how come more people aren't seeing them? Do we have enough space in the UK in the wild woods and places that Bigfoot could survive? Now, certainly when it comes to the American side of Bigfoot, they kind of speculate that Bigfoot's very clever and they don't go into big cities and they use the water systems to travel about from wood to wood. And there's enough remote places in America where they could live without really being seen. And of course, lots of people, including police officers and all these really responsible people in society, have seen them and made claims. So, could a Bigfoot creature fundamentally survive all throughout the UK? And it really does take some thinking about this, because let's face it, the UK, if you've never been to England, the one thing you'll notice is that there's buildings everywhere. Unless you go to places like some of the places in like Wales, which can be quite remote in the mountains of Wales, or you go to Scotland where there's lots of remote places where Bigfoot could probably survive quite easily in the woods in Scotland and in the valleys. But then again, Bigfoot, if they are surviving and they do live in the UK, they must have learned, throughout the last few thousand years to adapt, to live in the wild but not be seen. Because let's face it, if Bigfoot does exist and they're not clever and they're being seen all the time, it'll be in the papers all the time. It'll be every day there'll be an article. Oh, man sees Bigfoot whilst going for a picnic, or family go to a wood for a walk and they see a massive Bigfoot. And then, so it makes you think: could they survive, and could they survive without really being seen and without there leaving a lot of evidence? It makes you think. It really does. But I think in England it will be very difficult. But yet, all throughout England, you'll find hot spots. And you go to the Deborah Hatswell channel, she's got a map of England where it shows you all the hot spots of where people have seen Bigfoot. You're talking some people that have really responsible jobs, and I don't really want to come forward and show themselves and talk on camera, but yet they're quite willing to, give a witness statement to say that, I'm a solicitor or I'm a judge and I've seen a Bigfoot in the UK and I can't explain it. So it does make you think whether Bigfoot are real. But imagine if they are real. Imagine if, let's say, next year somebody captures one in a cage or shoots one. But would that be censored by the governments of the world? Because would they want you to know, as the public, that such a creature exists? Because what would happen? What would it do to society if suddenly next year, the British government say, oh yeah, this man called Donald, this random name I selected then for no reason, don't know why, went out and he ran over a Bigfoot down in Lincolnshire or in Scotland. And we now got the body, and here's your proof: Bigfoot is a real thing. Could you imagine what it would do to society? And it's a bit like UFOs, isn't it? Or whatever they call them now, the new name they've rebranded them to. If next year they came out and said to everybody in the world, oh yeah, aliens exist. Ever since World War II, we've been having negotiations with aliens. We've got their technology. We've found their craft. We shot their craft down. We know that there's 30 different species of aliens visiting the planet. Could you imagine what that would do to society? Because that would dramatically change society within itself, and it'll be a shock. It'll be like discovering that God is real and there's an afterlife. Could you imagine that? If science proves that when we die we go to heaven, people are going to start, jumping off bridges because they've had enough of life, and they think, well, I've got nothing to lose because, as soon as I jump off this bridge, my body's dead and my soul's going to heaven, and I'm going to have a much better life. So that would also dramatically change life. And I think there's a film about that. So a lot of these things are censored. But let's just go to Vietnam, a random country. But Vietnam has their own version of the Bigfoot. And they're a little bit smaller than the European and American Bigfoot. And they've actually designated a national park to that creature. So they're basically saying in Vietnam, yeah, we know that this Bigfoot creature exists. So we're going to give this national park and sign it over to our version of Bigfoot. But what does that tell you legally when you think about it? Because legally what Vietnam are saying is that, well, we know legally that Bigfoot exists. or our version of it, whatever they call it, I forget now. So we've decided to designate some wild spaces so that it can live in peace and harmony and not get eaten by humans, or killed off. So that's quite amazing, really, when you think about it. So yeah, the old Bigfoot debate is fascinating, and I think it goes way back in time. But what is Bigfoot? I mean, it's a bit like trolls, isn't it? We often say, well, what is a troll? But it's fundamentally a troll, a Neanderthal. And people, again, in America and across Europe and in the UK, have seen wild men that are very hairy. So, and they speculate that actually these are Neanderthals, and Neanderthals never died out, and small pockets all over the world survived. So is that another thing? Is that what people are seeing? Are people actually seeing Neanderthals, or some time of some type of human creature, couldn't say that, and that hasn't died out, and that the human race isn't the only human race on the planet, and there's a predecessor like the Neanderthals still around and still living, because people have seen these creatures, and there's lots of famous accounts. So it makes you think, really, and imagine it if next year they said to us, going back to UFOs, that yes, actually, UFOs are a real thing. Can you imagine it? The change in society is going to be fast, because we're no longer going to be a species stuck on this planet. We're going to be a species with aliens out there in space, civilizations that are far more advanced than us. Are they going to come down and try to take over the planet and eat us all? Or are they going to come in peace, like, the Vulcans, and give us technology? And the thing is, the governments of the world, whether you believe in the world governments, whether you believe in the elites or the globalists, they can't tell you tomorrow that aliens exist, because that would dramatically change the way we think in the world. So I can guarantee you what's happening. We're being programmed. If that's true, if aliens do exist, and that governments across the world, the Russian government and the Chinese and the Canadians and the Americans and the British have found down and shot down alien craft, which is what they speculate has happened. And in the past, we've gone to places when we've found, alien craft that have disappeared for, that have been, crashed many years ago, even hundreds of years ago. And there's lots of accounts in that throughout history. If they suddenly said tomorrow that aliens exist, that's going to dramatically change the planet. So they've got to program you, and they've got to program me to get used to the fact that aliens exist. And that happens over years and generations, not decades. It happens over a long time, because they can't suddenly say next year and have a big announcement. Donald Trump releases all the alien files, all the secret files that the CIA are keeping, and the FBI, and all the governments across the world. And some governments are being quite open about it, like the Brazilian government, I believe, are quite open. And, you're seeing these videos of, Tic Tac craft being released by the Pentagon. But if they said that very suddenly and not programmed and planned it, it will just dramatically change the world, and people would probably stop going to work. And because the whole dynamic, the whole epoch of the world we know it would change, because we're no longer a solitary species on a planet. We're now part of a multi species contact across the universe. So that would change things too much. So they got to program you. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of films about aliens. We see a lot of these ancient alien TV programs, because they're all part of the programming. And another example of this is the old myth about Hitler, and this completely changes the subject. Did Hitler die in 1945, or did he actually live and go to South America, like a lot of evidence shows you? Because why would the CIA and the various letter organisations after World War II, including British letter agencies, be looking for Hitler? And there's lots of accounts and lots of evidence that point in that way. Again, they couldn't fundamentally tell you, and let's say, next March they're going to release all the information and tell the whole world that actually, what happened in World War II wasn't fundamentally right, and that Hitler actually escaped, and Scorzani, the SS officer, helped in that, because that's when he was in New York and dying, he made a deathbed confession how he helped, Hitler to escape Germany. Then he went to Spain and Portugal and got on a U-boat and went to Argentina. So again, you get a lot of these programs that are being on hunting Hitler and all these programs talking about, oh, did Hitler survive World War II? Because that's all part of the programming. That's all about you being programmed in case that is real. I mean, I'm like this. I'm 50-50 really. Did Hitler die 45 or did he survive? Well, I think it's too close to call. But so that's, you know, a whole different subject. But yeah, again, it's all a part of the same picture of how we're programmed. And of course, the people that control information are the people that are in control. And information has been controlled through millennia and through thousands of years. I mean, the Romans were controlling information. And no doubt, all throughout history, information has been controlled by the people in charge. So let's just go back to your comments. And I hope I've not gone too far down the rabbit hole with that one. But I'm well read, and you know, conspiracy theories are only a conspiracy until somebody proves them true. And how many conspiracy theories have actually been proven to be true? There's a hell of a lot of them out there. And of course, you also get the other side of things where you get some of these conspiracy theory, like the old David Icke theory that actually the royal family are lizards. This is a little bit too far-fetched, but how do we fundamentally know what's the truth? Because we're not told the truth. Because we don't live in an open world where the truth is actually given to us. Because again, it's about control. They control what you think in your head. So, yeah, so just going back to your comments, give me a second. Because I went on a little bit there and I missed some of your comments, but I've probably gone way too far down the rabbit hole, which reminds me of a folk tale. So just bear with me, because I've got a few comments to read. So that's talking about Bigfoot and werewolves and a few other things. And it's quite fascinating. And perhaps in another live stream, we could cover these in a bit more detail. And then Hasdak says, I will look that up at Michael Potts. And then Sam says, House Brownie, they are tricky. Well, again, you know, all throughout the culture of the world, we have different names for them. So in England, we call them boggarts. In Scandinavia, they'd be called, what they're called in Scandinavia, I forget now, wait a minute. It's in my brain, but I can't get it out. It'll come back to me in a second when I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking, but I can't think. Yeah, but so these sort of creatures have always been around, but we're just that different cultures, just we brand them and give them another name. Oh, Tomte. So in Scandinavia, they call them a Tomte, so Tomte, and that's very much like a brownie, or very much like a boggart. And then Sam says, what is your opinion on how Odin sacrificed himself on the world tree is similarly depicted of Jesus' crucifixion? Spear went in the same side, same spot. One of the myths about Jesus, and I've been to Jerusalem and I've been to Bethlehem, is that they always say that Jesus was pierced through the hand. Because he got the mark, isn't it? What you call it. But that's not true, because if you pierce somebody and put them on a cross on the hand, then the hand's going to tear through. So actually, it's through the wrist. That's how they used to sacrifice people to a cross. The Romans, they would put a nail through your wrist and not through your hands. So that's one of the massive myths about Jesus, is that he wasn't nailed to the cross by his hands. It was actually through his ankles, and it would be through his wrists. And of course, if you're being pierced through a wrist, and if you're unlucky and it pierces one of your main veins, then you're going to bleed out quickly as well. But then again, maybe the Romans were clever enough to know how to pierce a nail through somebody's wrist without piercing one of the main veins, which I suspect is probably the case. And if you ever get a chance to go to Israel and go to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, do so, but maybe not at the moment. But their history is fascinating. And again, there's an old documentary, weren't there? And it talks about all these different people throughout history that had the same story of Jesus. There's actually dozens and dozens, and not hundreds of people that were sacrificed to the cross and that were reborn. And I can't quite remember the name of that documentary. It it's got a funny name, funny word, associated with language, but I forget. Perhaps one of you guys would remember. It was, you're talking about 15 years ago, and then there was a follow-up series, documentary, which I never quite finished watching. But it was quite eye-opening. But you saw the documentary talk about all these people throughout ancient history, and they all, got sacrificed to the cross, and they all died and came back alive. And then we often debate when it comes to Odin or Rodin, what sort of a tree it actually was. Was it an ash tree? Was it a oak tree? Was it a yew tree? So there's lots of speculation about what the real tree was. I think it was probably an ash tree myself, but then again, I read other accounts which say it's an oak tree, and then other accounts which say actually it's a yew tree. So again, it's a bit like the old myth about, Loki giving the arrow to Hod, the blind god. Was it an arrow? Was it a spear? There's lots of debate about that. Now, I've always heard the stories and read the stories that kind of say it's an arrow, but then other people say, no, actually, it's a spear. It wasn't an arrow. But I've always believed it was an arrow wrapped in mistletoe. And then some people say it wasn't mistletoe. Some of the beliefs are saying, well, actually, it was ivy. So, of course, we lose this translation through history and things slightly change. And then Opperton says, we have a cathedral that is 1,000 years old, and I was in there, bad vibes and sadness in there. Well, yes, some people, some places that have had a lot of bad history will resonate that bad history, because all that negativity and sadness and badness will remain there, and you can feel it. Some days you go in a building and you get this unwelcoming, cold feeling, and that's because of what's happened in that building. And we have a comment here from YouTube's Scourge. It says, hello guys, my condolences for your all's loss. Well, I assume you're talking about Egil, who passed away 2 years ago, but at least he's being remembered, and that's what Egil wanted. It's what we talked about before he passed away, because I think he knew he was passing, and me and Eirik both knew at the time that something wasn't quite right with Eirik. And then when you look at some of the older videos that he filmed before that, you can see he looks a bit gaunt and not his normal self. So without knowing it, we kind of knew it, but we didn't know it. But when I talked about it, we both sat down at my house and we both talked about legacy and what was important for him. And, I said, well, what am I going to do with all your videos, Egil? I got loads of videos we filmed and never published. Do you want me to publish them? Do you want me to keep your legacy going and your memory? And he says, yes, please do that, because that's so important, because I had that impression on so many people. He wanted that legacy, and of course, as a Norse warrior and a Viking, word fame and legacy is so important to us, because it's important that we try to be remembered. So Egil is a bit like Ragnar Lothbrok. He'll be remembered in history, not because he went and raided Lindisfarne, but he'll be remembered for who he was and the person he was, and hopefully on the channel we've done that. And then King Edward says, Often says, YouTuber scoured, hey, and scowl. And then King Edward says, what's your thoughts of the big black cat sightings that's been reported of big cats that were native to Britain and were thought to be extinct? Well, I think that's slightly, well, let's take the two cases. So you got the one case where I was saying that actually the black cats haven't died away, and they're just a very small number that survive throughout history. And then you got the other account of saying, well, back in the 50s and the 60s, when people kept wild cats, and when the laws changed where you couldn't keep anymore, people released them in the wilds. But on the hand and the case where we're saying, well, the black cats survive history and managed to survive, well, why don't we have wolves? And why don't we see wolves in the UK? Because I think the last wolf was killed in the 18th century. So why haven't they survived and the black cats have survived? Are wolves more likely to be hunted than black cats? And I think that's probably a case when it comes to wolves versus wild cats, because I think wild cats are probably more difficult to see and more difficult to hunt when it comes pairs to wolves, because wolves are more of a hunting pack animal. But then again, you get the case of, and certainly around where I live, just 3 miles away, there was a sighting in a field of a man that was working in a garden centre. And he said he was working in the garden centre, and he said, I was looking in the field and this massive black cat walked across it. And he said, I've got a cat and I know what a cat looks like. And it wasn't a normal household cat, it was massive. And of course, there's been lots of sightings all throughout Derby and Derbyshire, not Derby itself, because they don't go in city centres, but there's been lots of sightings, of wild cats. In fact, I used to know an old guy who was a police officer, and he said on a number of occasions he has seen black cats. And I always took him to be a very credible witness, and he used to tell me, yeah, we all know about it. And he lived and worked around a place called Ashbourne, which is about 10-15 miles in that direction. And he said, yeah, we all know about it in the police. This is going way back in time when the police were actually the police and not like today. And you say, yeah, we all know about it. Wild cats are in the area, and the farmers report the animals being hunted and mutilated and half ate. I went offline. And why is it after about 2 hours we go offline and come back on again? Oh, damn you, YouTube and your signal. So yeah, so there's definitely some evidence that kind of state that we have wild cats in the UK. And certainly, again, if you go to Deborah Hatswell YouTube channel, you'll see that map of England where it's got all the sightings of all the Bigfoots and the werewolves. And it also includes all the sightings of the wild cats. And could wild cats fundamentally survive in the wild? Well, yeah. And there's rabbits. There's local farms with sheep in the fields. Lots of animals for them to eat. So they've got the animal source and the food source for them to survive in the wild. So that's true. And we do have wild cats in the UK. But whether they're native and they've been around since the beginning of time, or whether it's a case of they're wild cats that have escaped from zoos, it's happened, and they've escaped and been let go by collectors who collected wild animals. But in the 1960s or the 70s, the laws changed to what you could have when it came to keeping wild cats and so forth. And then, we certainly got a case of parakeets in the UK, parrots that are being released, and now they're breeding like anything. So if they can survive, then fundamentally a big cat could survive. And then Offer 10 says, I think all cultures have some kind of monster figure in folklore. Well, yes, but of course, those have been created in folklore to keep your children safe. But are they based on something that's actually there in the wilds? And you think about it, you go back to the medieval age, well, there's only going to be a few million people in the UK compared to, 60, 70 million people in now. And there would have only been, 500 to a billion people on the planet. So we've bred and vastly increased the numbers. But that's progress of humanity for you. Oh, we have Martin here. Hello, Martin. The Viking Martin Brown. How's life? It says, hi, my mate has size 12 feet and he's a bit hairy. Just saying. So is your friend actually the reason why we've been seeing lots of Bigfoot sightings? And when I was on about the people that are taking over my local pub very soon, and I've actually done it now, well, their son is 7 foot tall or 5'10", and he must have size 14 feet. So there are some very big people out there. And then Offer 10 says, hi, the Viking Martin Brown. So how are you, Martin? How's life for you? I'm having a beer. It's the bottle's empty, but it's a Banks, or Banksy's we call it. I call it Banksy's. Or Banks really, but it's very nice. It's got a slightly tangy taste to it, so I don't mind. And then King Edward says, what's everyone's favourite alcohol drink? Well, when I'm not drinking beer, my favourite drink would be something like rum and coke. I love a bit of rum. Good old, Caribbean lager. I like some of them. Some of the German lagers are quite nice, but I do love rum and coke. I don't have it very often because I'm not a big drinker. This is probably the first beer I've had in my house for 2 or 3 weeks. So literally, I can go and buy 6 bottles and they'll last me a couple of months. I'm not a big drinker at home. I tend to do most of my drinking when I go out, which is on average about once a week. I'll probably have 3 to 4 pints once a week if I'm lucky. But I do love a beer now and again, and I do miss those live streams I used to do 2, 3 years ago, where I was doing 4 or 5 hour live streams and drinking beer during the live stream, and I didn't really get drunk, but perhaps we'll do that again. I'll have a few beers and we can all drink together and have a good time and tell you some stories, talk about history and go from there. And then Martin says hello, and then House Dak says a pint of cold John Smith shandy. Yes, I like a pint of John Smith's. It's a very good beer, I must say. I also like a pint of Woodall's County beer. That's not bad as well. And then I had a pint of Cherry Stone. And then I had another pint of a Falstaff beer. But I do recall I got quite a lot of beer reviews to actually edit and put together for the channel. So there's probably 30 to 40 of them at least I've got to actually edit in the future. So I will get them out at some point when I got my act together. And then Martin says, the Viking Martin Brown, favourite drink, black bush whiskey and ginger wine. Oh, whiskey mac. I do love a whiskey mac. I don't often drink whiskey. I must say it's a rare thing, but I do have some whiskey in the house and it's about 30 years old. And very rarely, if I want a bit of a hot toddy, a bit of ice, a bit of water, and a bit of that whiskey, and my God, I don't like the cheap whiskey because it's not aged enough, but you could drink that. It's quite a nice drink because and very rarely would I have a little bit in a glass neat. And then King Edward says, my favourite is rum and whiskey. What, in the same glass? Rum and whiskey in the same glass. I'll have to try that. But I do love a good rum. And there's rum out there. One of my favourites is called Kraken. And that's not a bad rum either. And then Sam says they call their what Apses has been US soldier said they threw rocks at them all. Well, yeah, I mean, that was in Vietnam when the US soldiers encountered their version of the Bigfoot. And, they'd have whole massive logs thrown at them and rocks. But that's also happened in America. There's been a number of situations when, hunters have been, camping and sleeping in, a hunter's shack, and they've had massive stones thrown at the shack because it's trying to scare the people away. And I think that's quite a common story throughout all of the Bigfoot lore across the world. And then Sam says, a well-made Bloody Mary. I never had a Bloody Mary in my life because I don't like tomatoes. So I could never really bring myself around to having tomato sauce and having a Bloody Mary. But I do like tomato juice. I do like tomato sauce and I do like tomato soup. But, I've never had a tomato in my life. I'll just avoid it. It's Loki's work, that is. When Loki invented all the animals, Slipnir and Fenrir and Jormungandr, he also invented tomatoes and Brussels sprouts, I think. But we just lost that through time. And then Sam says it's between that or my homemade mead. Well, you can't beat a bit of mead. Then Sam says the US just added a natural disclosure today about the universe. What's happened there? What they said? I'm not seeing that. But it was quite interesting a few months ago back when they were having a White House, meeting and a news thing, and they were talking about the fact that the US have got the technology to manipulate time and space. So, during one of these White House little news conventions, are they telling us that they've got the ability to time travel and also the ability to, go to different dimensions? Which a lot of that is speculation within the UFO world that's what they've got and the technology they've got reversed from crashed UFOs. But it does make you think. And then Sam says the aliens, the UFOs form of life at the national hearing. Well, are we getting to the stage when it's all going to come out in the future? We'll see. And then Martin says, I have rhubarb mead in the middle of turning into something, be alive after drinking. Rhubarb mead. Now that's fascinating. I love a bit of rhubarb, and I've got some in my garden growing wild. And then King Edward says they would have a hard time with programming me to follow their ways, as I'm rebellious and follow my own ways. Well, same here. I mean, I couldn't really. I mean, we could all be programmed subconsciously, but I can't be programmed consciously because I'm too aware and I'm too awake when it comes to what's going on in the world. And it's a bit like, language. Language is magic. And then the other day, my friend Ryan was telling me about the word bless. When you think, oh, bless you, be blessed. But when you think about it, what does bless mean? And she was saying, well, actually, bless means be less. So, you're saying to people and yourself, be less. But is that true? And then Sam says, they, us, for almost 100 years with movies, propaganda, and these newspaper articles. Well, again, yeah. And then hashtag says Hitler didn't want a war with Britain. Well, no, he wanted us to be his ally and to side up with him. But it's only because of Chamberlain and because of Churchill that never happened. But again, how much propaganda and how much forbidden history from World War II has been hidden. And then Sam says they did a DNA test on the burnt wall that was supposed to be Hitler, the burnt body, and they found it to be a woman. Well, again, that's been censored because a lot of that evidence isn't really being made public. Of course, a burnt body could be anybody. And then Sam says, sorry, the burnt. Well, I corrected that. And then we've got some emoji from Opperton, and I don't quite understand all the emojis yet, so I can't make out what that means. I really need to go out and buy a dictionary of emojis and study them, because some emojis are like, what the hell is that about? What does that mean? And I don't use them often, but I know how to use the ones I do need to use. But some and there's that many bloody emojis in the emojis list, but it goes over my head and baffles me. And then Viking Martin Brown says, I'm watching a very old TV show called The Tomorrow People in the middle of season 2. Yeah, I've seen that. And for some reason, I'm not put on my Thor's hammer on today. I've got to put it on before camera. I forgot. I did wonder what was in my pocket. Never mind. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I've seen The Tomorrow People or whether it's on my list to watch. But at the moment, I'm watching Highway to Heaven for some reason, because I've never seen it, and there's been a few good episodes of it, and I quite like Michael Landon, and I quite like Fit to Wrench. It's just one of those nice feel-good factors, but whenever I watch TV, I put it on, and then I'm doing other things, like working on thumbnails in the background or entering comments. So I don't always concentrate to watch TV unless I'm really lying down on my bed or sitting on my sofa to concentrate. But I get distracted by things like, I've got to put the description in. I've got quite a few descriptions for some of the videos for the last few days. I'm not done yet. I was going to do it today, but not got round to it. And then Hashtag says, did he take a roll up the sleeve? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Have I missed something? And then Aaron Kelly says, I see. And Aaron Kelly says, yep. And then Martin says, badass. Our community centre was burnt out last night. And the streets around Ballymena, Portadown, Belfast Lane are dangerous to go out over the last few nights. Yes, I saw that on the news about that centre being burnt down, but I didn't realise it was that close to you. Well, if you're ever in peril, Martin, you need to escape, just come to Derby and I'll put you up. I'll look after you, Martin. But yeah, and what's been happening over there is a terrible thing. But people shouldn't be going around rioting and burning cars and houses, because what does that actually solve? Nothing. But then again, a lot of the problems with that is because the government haven't addressed some of the bigger problems that are evolving around the UK, because they just let things carry on and they don't deal with the situation. And then King Edward says apparently they are releasing wolves back in the Highlands of Scotland. Yes, I read that. A bit like the beavers, and the beavers are now, breeding and taking over and causing flooding in some places in the UK. And in fact, 20 miles in that direction, there's wild beavers. I keep pointing at directions, over there 20 miles, over there 100 miles. But yeah, in South Derbyshire and Staffordshire, there are wild beavers now. But that would be quite amazing to release wild wolves. And then we've got a thumbs up. I understand that one emoji. That's a thumbs up. I understand that one. And then Sam Stapleton says, hi, Martin Brown. And then Offerten says, that sucks, the Viking Martin Brown. It does. And then Martin says, I'm having a dark chocolate, hot chocolate with whipped cream and a side of red velvet cake. I've got some yum-yums to eat. I've got 3 left. Took them out of a bin yesterday. There's nothing wrong with them. I do like a yum-yum, but I like them to be a bit more stale than fresh, because I think they taste more crispy and better. So I like to leave them out in the cupboard for a few days. And a yum-yum is just a savoury, sweety kind of a cake. Then King Edward says, I have had rum and whiskey together once. Yeah, I don't think I've had that. I'll have to put it on my list and try it. And then Offerten says, akuvit is more common here than whiskey. Oh, cool. I still got, that apple drink you told us about on the channel. You brought, Martin. You told us about. I still got a bottle of that upstairs from Germany. I bought 2 bottles of it. I drank one, but I saved the other one. But I forget the name of it. But if I go upstairs and find it, I know where it is. It's like an apple schnapps. It's lovely. And the hashtag says, I'm hanging a coffee and cut cold bacon sandwiches. Yes, I had bacon cobs earlier, but I noticed one of the cobs was a bit mouldy because I could smell the mould, so I had to put it away. And I just ate the bacon. And then Shine Your Light. Oh, hello, Shine Your Light. Lovely to see you here. It says, time does not exist. Well, yes, time is just being made up to control. And then hashtag, I got rhubarb down the allotment. Well, you can't beat a bit of rhubarb. And then Shine Your Light is explaining be less or bless, so be less. And that's quite fascinating. Of course, language is magic and words are magic, and the language we use is quite amazing. And then Shine Your Light says they hoped hire Hitler. Well, the British Secret Services helped to burn down the Reichstag, didn't we? So we was kind of supporting Hitler in the early days and actually funded him, from what my understanding. But that's a conspiracy. But I think there could be something to that. And then when you see the Hunting Hitler program, they taught and showed you all the evidence about how the Vatican and the Red Cross in Switzerland were hoping, German leaders and high important ranking Germans to escape, giving them false papers and passports. So that was also a true thing and has been proven. And then Shine Your Light says etymology. Because you can buy a dictionary of etymology, and then that gives you words, meanings. And that's quite fascinating. I love a bit of etymology. I mean, I say that word quite a bit, and then people don't understand what you're on about. The meaning of words. And then hashtag says, turn the television off, unplug the aerial. Yeah, I don't watch live television. I'm very selective what I watch on television. I very rarely watch the news, but it's all the same bullshit all every day. It's always got some disaster on it. And then we've got the favourite saying by Shine Your Light, which is tip top, toppity toe. Because I'm going to have to start using at the end of the videos. Oh, tip-top, toppity-toe. What makes you think where that comes from, actually? I'm going to have to ask Google or Gemini where that comes from. And hashtag, I meant, did Eggle take part in the needle compliance test? Well, yes, he did, actually, yes. Because I never had the special operation, but Eggle did. And then, he kept on lecturing me why I should go and have the special operation. But, I said to him, well, I don't want the special operation because, but back in my mind and my sixth sense is saying, don't have it, don't have it, don't have it. So, and then if I was in a situation where I was going out, I may have had to have it, but because I was caring for my dad at the time and because I wasn't leaving the house, I didn't really feel, and then all my family kept on trying to make me go and have the special operation. So I'm so thankful. And then I watched the Dr. John Campbell videos and all that at the time. And then, so my sixth sense and my intuition just said to me, don't have it. It's not good for you. And I also knew a lot about vaccinations in the first place. So that's the reason why I didn't have it. And I'm glad I didn't have it. But Eggle did go and have the special operation. You can't really, even to this day, you can't really talk about it too much because back in the day, 4 years ago, if you said that word with a V, your video would have been taken down and maybe your channel banned. And then the Viking Martin Brown says, I have family from Leeds and Blackpool over on holiday. They're a taxi driver for a few days. And then Opperton says, do you have wolverines in England? Well, no, not as far as I know. No, we don't. And then Shiny Light says, me. And then Hazardak says, I did not comply and any of it. It was all about control and making money. Well, of course so. I mean, I didn't wear a mask when I went out, really. And I got told by a few shops not to go in the shop because I'm not wearing a mask. But as I explained to them, well, if you get a cigarette and you smoke a cigarette and put it outside the mask, the smoke goes through the mask. So how are you meant to stop some airborne, particles from being breathed in? And of course, wearing a mask all the time isn't good because you're just breathing your own bacteria from your lungs all the time. And then Sam Staples says, go bye, have to drive home. So you're going there. So bye, Sam. I don't know why I did it in that funny voice. I do sometimes. I'll do funny voice. Go, hello, in videos. I can't help it. And then Hashtag says, I got kicked out of B&Q. Oh, well, the popular thing back in those days was to get arrested by the police, and then you could sue the police for wrongful arrest. Because how many people did they arrest? Like there was that famous case with the two ladies in the Peak District going for a walk, and the police went and arrested them, just for walking in the bloody wilds. And then Opperton says, see you later, Sam. See you, Sam. Take care. Drive safely. Across Texas. Watch out for wild boar. There's a loads over there in Texas. And then Hasdak says, almost had a fight in oldies with some mass lefties or lefty. Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many bad videos of people, calling out people that weren't obeying the system, for not wanting to wear a mask because the mask didn't fundamentally work, or people trying to get you to have this special operation. I mean, the amount of pressure my family put on me, and they try to make me feel guilty by saying, well, you won't be able to go abroad in the future. You're going to be, you won't be able to get a passport, or you won't be able to get a bus pass, and you won't be able to get a job in the future. And they tried all of that, but I just saw through it so much that it was just bullshit and control. I'm not, as I said to him, I said, no, I'm not stupid enough to fall for it. And then we've been proven true, haven't we, fundamentally so, because it hasn't fundamentally worked. I mean, I agree with some of the older people needing it, granted, if it saved their lives. But for a lot of us who didn't really need to have what was done to the populace, and how much damage has been done since. I mean, there's people still today that are really suffering because of the fact that they did it and they had it, and it's crippled their lives. And then Offerten says, Braggy, what is your favourite Viking woman? And mine is the infamous and beautiful woman Floydis, Eric's Datia, known for raping in battle, was a fascinating saga. You're on about Egil's saga, not Egil's saga. You're on about Eric's saga, I think. And then Hashtag says, yes, those over 83. Yes, those were the people that needed it, and I agree with that. But the rest of us didn't need it. And you keep hearing, you keep seeing these YouTube videos. Oh, next pandemic is on the way. Disease X is here. Monkeypox. Well, I think I don't know if I could pick out a actual Viking woman from the sagas, but I have to think about that. But I've always been a big believer and worshipper of the goddess Freya all throughout my life. So I tend to worship Freya more than I do. Certainly, I don't worship Odin because he's too much of a, dangerous god, and I mean you need to be careful if you worship Odin. I certainly worship Thor. So Thor and Freya are so out of all the women in the pantheon of the Norse, then definitely Freya is the one that I've always associated with. In fact, I've had a few dreams when she's been in my dreams quite a few times, and that's always amazed me. And I could tell, I just knew from in the dream that it was her. But what does that mean if you dream about Freya? She's normally in some kind of a nice country, kind of a woody place, and everywhere it's peaceful and serene and that loving feeling. But I've not had it for a while. And then Hasdak says, most of us have an immune system. Well, to prove that the best way to get immune with that thing was to have that thing. But it's still today a very controversial subject, isn't it? What am I drinking out of? Oh, Shipmates Beer Club. I think when I was working at Wetherspoons, they gave us a few glasses because they throw away a lot of their glasses. And then Shiny Light says it killed them off, the rest of their beautiful souls. Well, yes, how many generations have we lost because of what we went through? We lost a lot of decent people. And of course, it was about getting rid of the older people and the vulnerable and the younger people, wasn't it, really? So Hasdak says, what plans for the future, Braggy? I don't really know. It's hard to think about, really. Because my future is about to change in the next few months, hopefully. Because I don't really want to talk about on the channel too much, really. But I'm going to be in a much better position in my life. And I've got to think about the romance side of things as well, with the old complication. I'm not allowed to talk about the girlfriend situation. She's banned me from talking about her on camera. So I did that video and she saw it, and she was not best pleased. Even to the point where I was using her as a character in the Day of the Cat videos. She told me not to do that. So I got that whole debate going in my mind about that situation. So, yeah. I just want to get through this moment in my life, and then I can think about the future. Because I'm quite lucky. I mean, I could say to myself, well, let's sell the house, let's move to to Scotland, or I could say, let's move to Norway, or I could say to myself, I'm in a position where I could, move to Southern Ireland. I thought about moving to Southern Ireland because I love folk singing. So I'm quite lucky in that position where in the future I'm not going to have to worry about things when it comes to the money side of things without putting it too obviously what's happening in my life at the moment. So, yeah, then with the old romance thing, you know, a lot of my friends like trying to advise me, well, you know, my girlfriend isn't a genuine person, but I kind of got to go and see it through first, I think. But at the same time, I'm being open-minded and thinking, well, what if I meet somebody else? Because my romance relationship situation is very complicated at the moment. And you know, as my neighbours say, you know, I've been through a lot of trauma, and I've been through a lot of crap in my life in the last few years because my evil family. So they kind of like saying to me, well, you know, you don't want to go out with somebody that's complicated. But then again, you can't help it when you love somebody. So that's just difficult and a challenge. So I'm trying to work it all out in my own mind where I'm going to be in the future. I don't want to have to. I don't mind moving away from Derby, but I don't also want to give up where I live in Derby. So if I could manage both, that would be great. But again, that's a complicated situation because of the complicated situation around where I live. Without really saying too much, because I don't know whether my bad family watch my videos, and I don't want to give anything away to them because, you know, why put fuel in their fire? So I got to be very clever, and I got to think about the bigger picture, and you know, whatever that future is, it's going to be on this channel. It's going to be developing the channel and taking it forward. It's going to be, you know, visiting places. It's going to be filming at locations. It's going to be traveling the world. You know, I like to go to Rome and Istanbul and go to Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. Quite like to go to Iceland. I got invited to Iceland a couple of weeks ago on Facebook to a festival, so that's on the list. I'd like to go back to America and Canada, and maybe I wouldn't mind going to like Galapagos Islands, go there. So I've got lots of plans that sense, and I know, you know, I want to do that. I mean, I thought about, you know, I want to get a nice classic car in the future, so I don't know what I'm going to get when it comes to that. Just have something a bit nice to drive. I quite fancy a hot rod. If I can find a decent hot rod for 10 grand, I quite fancy doing that and having, you know, something nice to drive around in. You know, buying a camper van or converting a van so I could travel. Getting a metal detector. I quite fancy doing that and doing some metal detecting on beaches and exploring that aspect of the channel. So there's lots of things I want to do, but it's just my life really has been in limbo for quite a while. It's been a limbo because of my dad's situation, because if I have a drink, because I get in a dry voice. So my life has been in limbo, you know, for quite a few years because I was caring for my dad. And when you're a carer, your life kind of stops. So that was a situation. And because of the situation I'm in at a moment, I'm kind of been in limbo. But, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And no matter what I do and where I go, you're coming with me as a channel. So that's going to be great. And of course, you know, I've got to think about the relationship and the settling down aspect of life. I mean, I would still like to have children in my life. But, you know, in 2 years, I'm going to be 50. Well, less than that, a year and a half. So, you know, I'm getting to the point where I'm going to have some children. I've got to knock them out soon. And so I've got to think about that, you know, without being crude. That's the international sign for shagging, isn't it? You know, so I've got a lot to think about and I've got a lot to plan. So, yeah, and then I'm you can probably see I'm thinking about it now. You know, yeah. But I just want to have a good journey and leave that legacy to the world when we've got to keep on remembering Eggle. And, you know, because, you know, there's a part of me in the past which think, well, at some point, should we put Eggle to bed? and move on without Eggle. But I don't think we can really, because that's not what he wanted. It's certainly not what I want. So I think we've got to carry on. And that's why all those years when I filmed with Eggle, I made a big reserve of videos which I never published. And at the moment, I'm re-editing old videos because I'm saving those brand new videos which you guys have never seen yet for that future use. Which is about 10 years worth I've calculated, and I could stretch it with the old videos to 15 years. So maybe, in 15 years' time, by the time we get to 2040, maybe we'll get to the point, unless we could bring Eggle back from the dead with artificial intelligence, which I think we may be able to do in the future. So I got to think about all these things, and there's a lot to it, and because of all the trauma I've been through, I'm trying to put myself first and think about myself for first. But then again, also the channel, because this has been a great help to me mentally and physically, and on a conscious and subconscious level. It's really kept me going. So it's so yes, hashtag. It's a very big question to say what's the plans for the future, but I certainly know within my mind where I've got to go and where we're going to go. It's just the journey and how we get there. Because if a lot of people, if you guys fundamentally knew the situation I'm going to be in the future, you may decide to not work anymore, without putting it too, bluntly. So in that situation, I'm very blessed because of my dad's legacy, and it's going to affect my legacy. So I've got a lot to think about when it comes to the future. But whatever I'm going to do, I want to film it, and I want to keep that record for the channel and to move us forward as a big family. And then I want to go and travel and meet some of you guys and come to your countries and travel. So if I come to Norway or Finland or so forth, and you could put me up for a few days, then please do so, because that's going to make me say to myself, yeah, I can go to Norway and this subscriber will put me up for a few days, and that'll be also quite fascinating. And then also just to knock about with a few of the reenactment groups that we've got to know over the years. So, I quite like to go to Belfast and hang about with Martin Brown for a bit and have a beer with him and look at his longships and in his group. So, yeah. And then Shiny Light says, stop. Remember, you are the creator, mate. And yes, that's very true, because you create your own thing. And it's from my heart and from the love I have for everything in life that we're going to create this wonderful future. And we're going to create this wonderful positive message and move forward in a positive way. And we are the destiny of our own fate, really. If I, let's say, decide right now that, I'm going to become a monk, then my decision now will affect that future. So what you think about and how you think about your future manifest what you want. Yeah, during the old thing we went through, with the old, and I had a friend of mine called Gaz. His name is Darby Gaz, and he moved to Czechoslovakia, and he bought a nice big farmstead. He said, the amount of money you pay compared to what you'll pay over here is ridiculously cheap. And he's running a hostel, and he's got like a nice big farm and 7 or 8 outbuildings, and he's having a right good life. If they said, getting Amazon deliveries is a difficulty, and getting on the bus is a bit difficult. So yeah, Bulgaria is a very nice, positive move in the future. But I do like where I live, and that's an awful big and scary move to think about moving away. And Offer 10 says, need to go to sleep. Here at home, there's a big military exercise, hard to sleep at night with all the banging. Well, I can't imagine what that's like. And then Shiny Light says, I'm off to Bulgaria in August. Well, let us know what it's like and send us a postcard. Let us know what the dumpsters are like in Bulgaria. And then Hashtag says, join the Woodland Initiative, mate. Yes, I did see your comment about that. And I did have a search online, but I've not found anything in Derby yet. So I've got to do a bit more research and have a look at the Woodland Initiative, because I do quite fancy living off grid and having my own little place. But it's just moving away from here is such a big thing. And then Shiny Light says stop. Stop, I will do. Then Hashtag says it's nice and cheap there, Shiny Light. And the Opera 10 says travel to Bulgaria from Norway is very cheap. Well, I agree. I mean, I do worry about where we're going in England and what we're going to end up with, what kind of future we got. I mean, if we get 10 more years of bloody Labour government, then I definitely don't want to be here because I'm bloody fed up already off them after 8 months. And then Hashtag says, you've been invited to Shropshire, laughs out loud. Well, that's wonderful, and I will bear that in mind, and I definitely do want to go to Shropshire and record some of the history down there. And then Shiny Light says, and you need to be true to yourself, integrity. And I think that's very true as well. I do need to be true to myself, but it's just trying to find that truth amongst everything I've been through and to move forward with that truth. Then would you like to have the blue tick hashtag? Let me know. And then I've got one, and you have to get permission from the Crown to detect the beaches. Oh, do you have to get the permission from the Crown to detect on the beaches? I didn't know that. I thought you could just go to a beach and detect. Oh, so it's a bit like getting a license for, when you go down the Thames, along the Thames, what do you call it, mudlarking. No, I never knew that. I was just going to get a metal detector and just go to random beaches and detect. And then Hashtag says, laugh out loud and get on with it. I will do. I mean, what's been keeping me in limbo is changing at some point in the future. And then Offer 10 says, Sozopol is a nice town in Bulgaria. Yeah, I definitely want to go to Bulgaria. It sounds lovely. And then Hashtag says, nah, he's part of the channel. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think we've got to keep Eggle going as long as possible and keep his memory alive and his legacy. I agree. That's why I've kept all those videos in hand, which I've never published. Because I think all throughout that time I was filming, I kind of realised, maybe on a conscious and maybe on a subconscious level, that I had to do that. So I did keep videos behind, and luckily we're in this position where we can keep publishing new videos in the future from Eggle. And I've also got quite a lot of videos in TikTok I never published, so some of them will have to be put out. And on my current phone, there's quite a few of them. There's probably about 100 videos of Eggle and myself, reading comments and stuff like that. So there's lots to think about going forward. And I do think at some point I better think about creating a digital version of Eggle, because I better, use his voice and upload video and then create a new Eggle. And I think he would love that, because that's all a part of that legacy. It'd be a little bit strange, a bit weird, but it's just my way of thinking how I can, when we get to the point when we've published the last video in 15 years' time, how can we continue to keep them going? And then I've also got to think about what happens to this channel when I pass away. So, where does it go? Who do I leave it to? So I've got all that to think about, Anyway, so really enjoyed this live stream. I'm going to go in a couple of minutes because my back's aching. If I keep on talking, I'll have no voice tomorrow. And I think it's Friday tomorrow, but I'm not overly certain what day it is at the moment. I think it's Thursday. Yesterday was Wednesday, so it's definitely Thursday. For some days I just forget, because every day is the same. Yeah, it's Friday tomorrow, because tomorrow I've got part 2 of me crafting a wooden club. Like one of these, but not that one. That's an old one. I'm like, this is the one from the garage. This one's a bit of work. I think this has woodworm. Yeah, is that woodworm? So thank you for hanging out. I love you guys for hanging out in these live streams, and it's really helping the channel. I think at some point in the next couple of months we'll be monetized again. I must apologise for the advertising and the adverts, but it does help to make a living out of what you're doing on YouTube, because it is fundamentally a business. We're there to make money, and I've still not got around yet to starting a new shop, because I made a shop with merchandise, but I've effed up, pardon my French, the business information by selecting USA, and you can't change it. It's bloody ridiculous. So I've got to go through the whole process of making a new 4th wall shop. It's not going to be difficult, but I just need to think about it and do it. So yeah. And then Hajdak says, thanks, mate. Don't overdo it. I've got a computer course tomorrow. Well, yeah, I'm going to, go upstairs and watch a bit of TV, relax a little bit, maybe have a cup of tea and just wind down for the night and probably not answer any more comments. Although saying that, I may lie down on my bed for a bit and think to myself, well, yeah, let's just go and lie down for a bit more. But I think, I'm at the end of the point of the day. And I was quite tired this afternoon. I got to about 6 hours of being awake and I got quite tired and had about half an hour sleep in my bed. And it was quite nice. But then I woke up just before 3 o'clock thinking I've got to get a 3 o'clock video out. It's my life. That's a song, that, isn't it? And then earlier I managed to sort out my Alexa because I've not had the unlimited music for a long time. And I wanted it on one device and not more than 4 devices. At one point, I had 5 Alexas in the house. So I've now gone to one device and I've got a month trial with unlimited music. I can now actually listen to the music I want. So I've been dancing around the house. I listened to the Beatles. I listened to the Hollies. Then I listened to Herman's Hermit. Then I put a bit of James on. Then I put the Velvet Underground on at the very beginning. So I've been listening to some nice music. And then I ended up that little music session listening to Bob Dylan, the album John Wesley Harding. John Wesley Harding was a friend to the poor. He travelled with a gun in every hand. So I listened to a bit of that. Hopefully that's not long enough to get a copyright. I do like a bit of Bob Dylan. So yeah, I just been dancing around the house. I did a bit of lawn mowing in the lawn. So I got 2 lawns technically. I'm currently emptying my big swimming pool because it's gone all green. So I'm trying to sort that out because I've heard next week it may be very, very hot. And it is very hot. I want to be in my big swimming pool, but we'll see. And I've charged up my battery on my car thanks to my neighbour. So it does start again after the disaster last night. But hey ho, that's just the way life goes. But we got there in the end and I learned a little lesson. And whenever you make a mistake, and my dad always used to say to me, if you make a mistake, son, it shows you 2 things. That first of all, learn from your mistake and don't do it again. And then secondly, you're only human and you're only as good as your last job. You make mistakes. That's the way life is. But you got to learn from that process when you make a mistake. And my dad was a very wise man, and I do miss him. And he is where he's going to be, and hope he's okay in spirit and body. Well, not in body, but in spirit. So yeah, so thank you very much. With 2 hours 42, that's excellent. And if you're watching this live stream afterwards and you got to this point in the live stream, I must say you are awesome. Thank you for watching this live stream for 2 hours 42. And maybe you've been doing a few jobs in between. But yes. I just love you guys to bit. And I'm just going to end on the wise words of Egil Thorson. Let's make the world a better place, and onwards and upwards. Like the live stream, share the live stream. Those are my words. So do give the live stream a like, because that really does help the YouTube to say, oh yes, this is a very good live stream. Let's go and share it out. And do share it with your friends. Let them know about his blonde-haired, Viking from Derby. And do leave a comment as well. And don't forget, you guys are awesome, and I love the Northworthy family we have created, and what an amazing journey we are on. Goodbye. Yes, I enjoyed that beer. What a privilege. I'll see you in a live stream, most probably tomorrow night. But doing a live stream is much better than watching television. So goodbye. Going now. Yay, we're gone, we're done. Yeah, another live stream.